Captain's Log, June 2nd, 2836. After 27 years of war between the Degen Coomers and the Sainthood Slayers, a new hope arises. As the battlefield lay weaponized, locked and loaded for destruction, negotiations for a peace treaty are in transition. The moderator has arrived at Station 42. Can this war be ended? Will the Coomers and Slayers find a middle ground?
Abort mission. I repeat, abort mission. Negotiation failure. Abort mission.
Heavy bogey, 6 plus, low orbit, over grid 15-2.
No joy, Yashin.
Then go to your window and look up their biggest tracking asteroid.
Copy, Yashin. Still blind. Got some kind of system-wide crash in the defense grid.
I want to track us up right goddamn now, because we got Boku inbound, and they're not carrying flow.
Wait one, Yashin.
We don't have flow.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I am Sarah the Raging Tomato here, bringing to you live another Moderator Monday on a lovely Sunday evening. I hope you've all enjoyed this weekend. Tonight, I will be joined by Michael Liebowitz. Did I say
Liebowitz, but we can go with Liebowitz if you want.
Liebowitz. I'm going to screw it up all night. I'm just going to call him Michael. And then also I have made by Jim Bob, JB, also known as my bulldog here at the Raging Tomato. This evening, we are discussing the question, where do rights come from? I believe in this circumstance, Michael has the affirmative and Jim Bob has the negative position. Michael, would you like to begin with your opening statement, please?
Sure. First, thank you very much for agreeing to moderate this. And Jim Bob, thank you for agreeing to participate in the debate. So in this context, a right is a moral claim or a just claim. In other words, a right is that to which one is morally entitled. Now notice that this presupposes a theory of morality. And incidentally, this is why I'm not a libertarian. Libertarians start at the point of rights. They start with self-ownership, assuming that one has a right to one's body. But they don't have a theory of morality to justify this claim. So what is morality? Morality refers to a code of values adopted by choice to guide human behavior. So do human beings need a code of morality? What are values? And are values factual, or are they just a matter of preference? For our purposes, there are two definitions of value, two senses in which we must use the term. The first definition is that which one seeks to gain and or keep. The second is any object or quality desirable as a means or end in itself. The first, as applies to humans, merely indicates what someone happens to value and is entirely subjective. The second, however, indicates what is desirable, what is worth seeking. This indicates what has value and is entirely factual, not a matter of opinion. Now, how do we arrive at these definitions? We do so by applying reason to our observations. We observe that certain entities, such as tables, chairs, and rocks, can neither act nor do they have to act to sustain themselves. Their existence is a matter of fact. They can do nothing to affect it. Other entities, however, such as worms, birds, lions, and humans, can and must act in order to sustain themselves. The difference, obvious to everyone, is between non-living entities and living entities. So when we observe living entities acting, we notice that some things, such as food, water, are good for them, while other things like poison and predators are obviously bad for them. They harm them. In other words, some things are of value to them. Hold on. While others are a disvalue. It is only for a living entity that something can be of value, that something can be worth seeking. We judge the value of a thing by whether it is good or bad for the life of an organism. Life is the standard of value. Now, most living entities act automatically on instinct. Humans, however, operate by choice. We have free will. Furthermore, we don't know automatically what's good or bad for us. We have to learn it. And with humans, there's also the possibility for a dichotomy between what we value and what has value, between what we seek and what is good for us. For instance, we have heroin addicts, alcoholics, gambling addicts, overeaters, people that engage in all types of behaviors that are not good for them. So not only do humans have to learn what is good for them, but we have to choose to pursue the good. This is what gives rise to the subject of morality and explains why humans need it. Furthermore, given the length of human life and the conceptual nature of human consciousness, we must codify the values that we're going to pursue, that are going to further our lives. Otherwise, we can undermine tomorrow's survival or 20 years survival, 20 years from now survival with the actions that we take today. In other words, today's actions can undermine our long-term interest. Humans need to choose to live by a code of values. A code of values adopted by choice is, as we have seen, a code of morality. So to summarize the view of morality anyway, life gives rise to value in both senses in which I have defined the term. An organism's life determines what is of value to it. In other words, life is the standard of value. As morality refers to a code of values adopted by choice, it is only to humans that morality applies. As each organism's life is its standard of value and moral values apply only to humans, human life is the standard of moral value. Now, to return to the subjects of rights, given that human life is the standard of moral value, and given that people have to choose to be moral, to act in furtherance of their lives, they must have the right to take those actions they judge to further it, so long as they respect the equal rights of everyone else. That's because we cannot have contradictions. I cannot claim rights for myself, but deny them to Sarah or Jim Bob. So in other words, how can people not have a moral claim, a moral entitlement, a right to that which makes morality both necessary and possible? Now, if someone acts in violations of a person's rights, that person has the right to use force to stop the violation. And that gets to the crux of it. In practice, rights define when force is appropriate. They demonstrate that self-defense is a moral act. Now, note, my task here was to demonstrate that that rights are factual, and that's the task going forward. It's not to elucidate all the implications of rights, nor to describe the societal conditions necessary for rights to be protected, or to describe the governmental systems that are necessary to do so. I also don't have to lay out a complete system of morality, including the values and virtues it entails. To make my case, all I have to demonstrate is that morality is factual. Now, to anticipate some possible objections to my theory, my opponent may argue that this isn't how people normally think of morality. But my manner of discussing morality dates back to ancient China and ancient Greece. It's completely in the realm of what morality is. So I think that objection will miss the mark. He may assert that morality has to be dictated by an external entity, such as God, but that assumes the very thing, or at least one of the very things, that's in question. He may say that rights don't exist. After all, we don't see them, we can't touch them, we can't point to them. But rights are a relational concept. They explain something that occurs when human beings live amongst each other. Similarly, friendship, couples, enemies, all these things are relational concepts. We cannot see them, we cannot touch them, but they nevertheless exist. Now, another objection may be is my opponent may assert what he believes to be the logical conclusion or a logical conclusion and implication of my theory of rights. And this will likely be something that's detestable to most people. And thus, what he'll try to do is to negate the validity of my argument by pointing to a conclusion that people find unacceptable. But that's not how we do things. We don't assess arguments by assuming a conclusion. We assess conclusions by the strength of the argument. And with that, I will turn it over. I'll give up the rest of my time and thank you both once again.
Thank you, Michael. Jim Bob, to you.
Okay, yeah. So the topic of the debate is, where do rights come from? In the opener, I heard more opinions about what he thinks morality is. It's actually the case that even if he produces a proof for rights existing, it wouldn't follow that we ought to follow them just definitionally because they exist. So you could focus on both, of course. Now, in some of the opener there, he said the theory of morality. He then went to value, seeking and gaining desirable. He did not make a distinction between one human who values one thing, they desire, let's say, to live peaceful, and another group of people who desire conflict and terrestrial gain and warfare. Both we've seen in the story of humanity. Michael didn't make a distinction of which values we ought to follow. He merely defined what a value is for people, which is seeking and gaining. Obviously, there's a disparity between people and what they desire. He said he reasons through observation that rights exist or that morality exists. He mentioned lions. He said that being a predator, he said having predators is not good for them. Well, being a predator is actually good for predators. So one could even argue that having predators is actually good for the prey. They build up defenses. They learn how to respond to the natural world. This would include human beings as well. There are predators who are human beings. There are human beings who are prey to other human beings. There are human beings who are prey to other animals that aren't human beings. This still doesn't tell us where rights come from. This still doesn't tell us why we ought to even acknowledge rights as some sort of moral position at all. He also mentioned furthering their life, so long as. Now he slipped in this conditional, which is unjustified. He said, do what you want, further your life, so long as you don't violate the thing in question that you didn't produce a justification for, which is rights. He also said morality, he basically tried to make a deduction that said morality, or without rights, morality wouldn't be really possible from that position. That's actually not true. Rights are in fact fairly a recent innovation. And there have been historical accounts of civilizations that had a sense of deontology or duties without this notion of entitlements. In fact, it was more based on what your duty was in society. That's what gave you what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do, a sense of duties. So a society with duties could actually flourish without even appealing to or inventing the concept of rights, which is fairly modern, and I would argue more strictly an Enlightenment fixture. The other part here is this idea that rights just exist. You reason them from looking. Well, rights don't exist in all places. So how do you look at nature or reality and determine that rights exist? For instance, how do you demonstrate rights exist in a place that doesn't acknowledge them? Do you have the right to invade a country that rejects the existence of rights? Do you have a right to do that? Without a state, let's say, on what basis? Sorry, you're not a libertarian. I would argue, I would restate what a right is. He did say, I think he can correct me if I remember correctly. He does acknowledge that they're kind of an entitlement. You're entitled to something. The problem with this is, to be more strict about what a right actually is a set of permissions and restrictions on behavior that are set by a collective of men with guns. That's all a right is. Anything you point to that's a right that you think is a right is merely a temporary set of behaviors you're either allowed to do or not allowed to do, that's completely governed and met with force by a collection of men, right? You don't get to choose ultimately sometimes what these permissions are and aren't. You're lucky if you get some sort of pathway to influence what these permissions are. Can I do this? Can I do this? No, I can't. Okay, I don't have a right to do that. The question of animals, notice that he did make the distinction between animals and humans. He didn't though give an ontological distinction between animals and humans, such that humans have this concept of rights, or that we ought to acknowledge rights, or somehow they're present for humans but not present for lions. There's no distinction. He merely described animals as being subject more or less to their own instincts and involuntary responses to stimuli. And then he grants himself this higher position of humanity, as if we've escaped the animal kingdom at some metaphysical level. He did not provide a metaphysical account for what distinguishes a human being from all other animals. I assume he's going to say reason itself. However, reason itself still doesn't give you a moral position. Why ought we not do X? Why ought we value rights? Regardless, the question of morality is still largely irrelevant. It's parallel. It could be a secondary argument. But the question of how do you demonstrate rights exist in any meaningful way? That's what I want to hear first. The next argument is, why ought we value or acknowledge these rights? If it's the case that you can't demonstrate rights exist, then the topic of the debate of where do rights come from is a failed debate, because you have to demonstrate where rights come from. What is the ontology of rights? It seems to me that Michael is reasoning that rights exist because he prefers a system where you pretend rights exist. That doesn't tell us where rights come from. If he's saying that rights are merely a construction, a conceptual invention by humans that aren't actual, but we should actually live as if they are actual, then he's basically conceded the debate that rights don't come from anywhere. They're just fictional, imaginary things that we probably should use the coercive methods to uphold and defend. With that said, I would love for Michael to continue and maybe give us an account of how he gets rights from reasoning. Where do you produce rights from reasoning?
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, hold on just a second. Thank you, gentlemen, for the opening statements. And a kind reminder, we're going to do it slightly different tonight, only because we are on a time constraint to accommodate. So we will go for about another hour and 15 minutes or so, and then we will read and respond. We'll do closing statements. We will read and respond to just a few super chats. I'm going to choose just 20 and up this evening, only for purposes of time's sake. We'll get through anything under that a little later into open panel, and then we will open the panel up and we'll have some fun and go from there. Gentlemen, the floor is open.
Okay. So first, he said that this is not a debate about morality. It's a debate about rights. The problem is right is a moral concept. It means a moral claim to something. Now, he made the claim that rights are a list of permissions that have to be granted by an entity. The problem is my definition of rights, and I can provide it later on my X page, comes from numerous dictionaries, comes from artificial intelligence, Grok, as well as Google. It comes from Samuel Johnson's dictionary from 1755. It's in philosophical dictionaries. A right, in the context we're talking about, it's a moral or just claim. So in order to show that human beings have rights, you have to first have a moral theory, which is why I did that. I nowhere said, as he said, that in order to have morality, you have to have rights. No, it's exactly the opposite. You have to have morality in order to have rights.
Okay,
so
Michael,
hold on one second.
That's a lot. That's a lot, right
there. You said a lot, so I have to address everything that you said.
I want to start with at least one thing. Is the only definition you're using for rights is just a moral claim to something?
A right is a moral or a just claim. Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. How do you determine something's just?
Well, how do you determine? Because justice also is a moral concept.
That's circular.
No, it's not. You have to go back to morality. You have to have
Okay,
a theory of morality.
so rights are a moral claim that's just, and I ask you what's just, and you say that which is moral.
That's not what I said. I said a right is a moral claim or a just claim, but it ultimately traces back to morality. I didn't say a moral claim is a just claim. I said a right is a moral claim. Now, also, he said that I only defined value in terms of that which you seek to gain or keep. That's false. I'd also defined value. I started off by saying it would be in two ways. The second way was any object or quality desirable as a means or end in itself. And I said life gives rise to that concept. Why? Because living entities have to act to sustain themselves. Some things harm them. Some things are beneficial to them. In the latter case, you have things that are of value to them. There's things that are of value to living organisms. In other words, there's things that are desirable. There's things that are
hold on a second.
Seeking.
Hold on a second. Can you give a living organism example? Let's say a bat.
Sure.
Are you claiming that you're making the claim that a bat actually values things?
No, that's not what I said at all.
Okay. You said
And
living
that's
organism.
I never said. You're talking about value in the case of a person that values something.
Mhm.
The definition of value as desirable or worth seeking is entirely factual. It has nothing to do with the bat's consciousness or the lion's consciousness. There are nevertheless things that are of value to them. You're using value in a different sense because there's multiple senses.
Desire is a thought about a thought. How do you distinguish for an animal the difference between an instinct that's an automatic response to stimuli and a desire?
Actually, what I said was it's desirable, and desirable means worth seeking. So the animal doesn't actually have to want anything. The point in the discussion is that it's going to seek things out, and there are things that are good for it. There's things that will sustain its life. That is what has value.
Okay, so the question of what is a right, the only definition I got was a moral claim to something, to X. A moral claim, right? It's just a moral claim, right? So if I say I have a moral claim to the neighboring country to take its resources, I have a moral claim.
Sure.
How do you distinguish from your concept of rights whether or not I have a right to that as a moral claim?
Okay, well, that is why you need a theory of morality. Now, notice that in the theory of morality, all we stated was that life is the standard of value and that a code of values adopted by choice is a moral code, right? So we're not arguing about the actual implications of rights or what is a right or what's not a right. All I'm arguing right now is that rights actually exist. That
That's
they're not a
question
matter
of what
of
a right
opinion.
is, though.
Yeah,
right?
no, hold on. What I'm saying is I told you that a right is that I stated the fundamental right that a person has to have, is entitled to act in ways that that person judges to be moral. But because of the law of contradiction, because you can't just say, well, I can do, whatever I want, he cannot deny others the same right. Now, you might say, well, there's implications of this further down the line, and we can get into that if you want. But for the present discussion, all I have to demonstrate is that there is a factual morality, and that flows from that are moral claims. Once you have morality, the morality that I'm talking about, you have moral claims.
I understand, but you neither have morality and you neither have the thing called a right, because if you're just defining a right to mean a moral claim, you're basically begging the question for what the moral system is. I agree that if you say we ought to value rights, we ought to be consistent, which is a larger claim you're making. We ought to be consistent and avoid contradictions, which that alone isn't justified from your view.
Okay, well,
So
hold on. No.
Wait, dude, you just went for you just went for a long time. Let me just get through it, okay?
Yeah.
So I'll ask you a more pointed question
Sure.
that you can't really evade the same way, okay?
I didn't evade anything. That's the first thing. I didn't evade anything.
Do I have the right to invade a country that doesn't acknowledge rights?
Okay, the question is irrelevant to the topic at hand.
Okay, all right.
Entirely
How did I
irrelevant.
know you dodged that?
It's not a dodge. It's because it's irrelevant.
I'm going to say that I would be agreeable that it actually is, because if the topic is whether rights, where do rights come from, and we're discussing from one country to another, if it doesn't exist in one country, but it exists in another, why is that? So I am agreeable that it is on topic.
No. Here's the problem. You have to first establish that rights exist. And then you can see the problem, Sarah, is you're thinking of rights in terms of different governments in different states. What I am talking about is individual rights, the individual's right to do certain things. Now, that implies that individuals obviously can form together and do certain things. But the point is first to establish right. Now, he says I didn't point to a moral theory. The fact of the matter is I absolutely did. I defined morality. It's a code of values adopted by choice to guide human behaviors.
That's not a foundation, dude.
Hold on. Well, it absolutely
That's a definition. That's a definition.
Yeah, it's a definition.
That's not a grounding. That's not a system.
Hold on. It's a definition derived from observation of how people behave or how anything behaves. And then you said, furthermore, I just wanted to touch on this first. You said that I didn't differentiate between humans and animals, but I actually did, because I said that humans operate on instinct while humans have free will. And that's what gives rise to the science of morality.
Okay.
Morality is just the name that we've given.
Michael, even if I granted you free will for the human, right?
Sure.
It doesn't follow that because humans have free will that they ought not violate other free will. You have to tell me from your system why ought a human not violate another human's free will? Okay.
So now to do that, we're going to really have to dive into ethics. Are we prepared to do that and switch the topic from rights to ethics?
Well, I'm trying. Well, this is the problem is like, I would define a right as just a set of entitlements people are given in certain countries by their government.
But that's not the definition of rights. You can make up whatever you want.
I'm
giving
an example. No, I'm giving an example, Michael. You failed to give an example. You merely said, when I asked, what is a right? You said a moral claim. And I said, well, what's a moral claim? And you said a claim that's morally just. And
no. That's not what I said. Moral? You're misrepresenting what I said.
Give me an example of something that's a right.
At the very beginning in my opening statement, right? I said that life is the standard of value. Human life is the standard of moral value. And I explained why human life is a standard of moral value.
Why is human life valuable?
I said it's the standard of value.
Why? You're assuming it's valuable. Why?
No,
is it
I'm not actually. What I'm saying to you is that that all life, any living entity, the way that you judge of what is of value to it is what is good or bad for it. Once you have a living entity, you have an entity that acts. You have things that are good for it. You have things that are bad for it. This applies to any living entity across the board, any single one.
That's not a moral claim.
I didn't. Hold on. I didn't say it was. Right? No. Jim Bob, I didn't say that was moral.
I know. I'm misrepresenting. I think I just want to make sure I'm understanding both of you the same way. Michael, I believe you're coming from a more individual approach, right? The human right is as an individual as is, right? And then
sure.
Jim Bob, you're viewing it from the standpoint of what is given to us in terms of like what our government allows or our societal culture norms, so on and so forth, correct?
I'm basically asking him a very pointed question, right? If what's good for a lion is to be a predator, if it's good for a human based on their subjective goals to be a predator, why is that morally wrong given that your standard is what's good for the organism?
Because but this is a different question. You first asserted that I'm saying that animals acting is a moral question, which it's not. Morality only comes into play once you have choice, once you can choose things. That's where morality comes into play. Now, you said to me just now, well, what if somebody values this? Well, some people can value all kinds of things. That's why in my opening statement, I said there can arise a dichotomy in human behavior between what they value and what has value. And I gave several examples. For instance, there was a time in my life when I was an alcoholic and a drug addict. I valued getting stoned. I valued getting drunk. Obviously, those things were harmful to me. So you had a dichotomy between what I valued and what was of value to me. So if you say you have a human being, what if he values being a predator? Well, what if he does? It still remains to be seen and argued whether or not being a predator is actually in that human being's best interest, if it actually furthers his life. And also in my opening statement, I said that being given the nature of human consciousness, which is conceptual, we have to think in principle. And I said, given the nature of the length of life, that humans have to act long term. So therefore, you'd have to show in a given case, what is actually in the interest, what is actually going to further that human being's life.
Is it possible that the best thing for a particular society is to not acknowledge rights?
No.
Tell me how that's the case,
Well,
definitionally.
hold on. The problem with your question again is you're already jumping to a political organization and you're saying we have a society. What I'm arguing is that rights form the basis of a just society. You first have to establish rights. Now, if you're asking me, this is a broad question you're asking about whether or not a society can flourish if it doesn't respect rights. And for that, I'll just point to Maoist China, Stalinist Russia, Nazi Germany, fascist Italy. I mean, we can go on and on and on with the countries that didn't respect rights and see how they panned out. But that doesn't have anything to do with the factual nature of rights.
So you're arguing, because the whole purpose of the debate is for you to demonstrate to me and the audience that rights actually emerge from reason. But if
No,
it's the case,
no. I've never said that. You keep saying that. I
where
never
do rights
said
come
that.
from?
Rights stem from the nature of human beings and the fact that they live amongst other human beings. The nature of human beings as moral entities.
That doesn't tell me where rights come from.
I just told you.
You're just saying that, dude.
Are you going to keep interrupting, or are you going to ask a question and let me answer?
You're making one claim at a time. Okay, it's fair for me to combat one claim at a time. Isn't it the case that civilizations existed before the concept of rights?
Sure.
Okay, so there you have civilizations sustaining themselves for whatever amount of time without assuming rights. So maybe civilizations had a set of obligations and duties, and they didn't have this concept of rights. Okay,
hold on.
So if that's the case, I'm asking you a very pointed question. How do you distinguish what's missing in one society that doesn't acknowledge rights and one that does? If you're going to say rights are produced in one and the other, is it just agreement?
Hold on. I'm not saying that I've never said rights are produced in one or the other. My claim from the start is that rights are factual. I explained why in my opening statement. You can laugh and you can, pander to the audience and do whatever you like.
Factual.
The right of a human being to act in furtherance of his own existence. Factual.
Wait, they have the right to do that.
Yes.
Okay. Can I take that right with force?
Hold on, you're switching the question.
No.
You can violate that. You can violate that right with force. You can violate right with force. The entire reason we argue for rights is to convince people. Obviously, if you have guns, you can violate somebody's right, Jim Bob. That's an obvious claim. No. Rights can be violated by people with guns. Of course, the whole idea, what we want to accomplish is to subordinate might to right, to put might on the side of individual rights, to protect individual rights. If nobody could violate rights, there'd be no need to have the concept.
Okay, look,
the whole reason we have the concept is because people can violate rights.
Look, I just gave an example. Like you said, right, that people, just for merely existing as an organism with choice, they have rights. And I said, isn't it possible for someone to just take away that choice?
Well, hold on. I'm a human being with a hand. Somebody can chop off my hand.
That's a reference.
But a hand still exists.
No,
but a hand still
is
exists.
a reference that's physical.
The hand
you
still
just
exists.
debunked yourself.
Okay.
Dude.
No, I did not debunk anything.
Is a hand physical?
Hold on. Does friendship exist?
Physical?
Jim Bob, does friendship exist? Yes or no?
A friendship? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Friendship's not physical.
Yeah. Why did you point to a hand then?
No, hold on. I used hand as an example, but then you said hand has to be physical.
You
implied that an existent has to be physical. But then you said friendship. But hold on. No, but that's irrelevant to the conversation.
Okay, cool.
It's entirely irrelevant.
I get it.
You're coming at me with entirely irrelevant questions. First, you entirely misrepresented my opening statement. You said I didn't provide multiple definitions to the term rights. You said that I didn't define morality. You said that I said that morality needs rights, all things I didn't say. Michael. And now you come at me with multiple questions.
I asked you for a specific example of a right that is you just,
and I gave it to you. I gave it to you.
And it's what? Someone can pursue whatever they want, right?
A person has the right to make choices that they think are going to further their own
I have a
interests.
choice. I think I have a choice to steal from people to further my idea of what progress is for me.
Sure.
You have a right to do that?
No,
Okay, cool. So you just debunked yourself. That's a
I did not, because if
You
you
did.
go back, no, I
Contradiction.
did not. It's not a
Of course
contradiction.
it's a contradiction.
No, hold on. Notice.
I
You just-
want to gather some more understanding of why it doesn't work based on
Sarah,
what
can
you're
I
saying,
answer his
Michael.
question first, and then
That's
then
what
I'll
I'm
answer-
asking. That's what I'm
I-
asking is for you to explain it.
No, I will, but can I answer his question first, and then I'll answer whatever question you want to ask?
That
Is that okay?
was my question. I wanted
Okay.
to allow
So
you.
note
the
that he said I contradicted myself and said, therefore, I've debunked myself. Note also that earlier on, I said that a person has the right to make choices that he judges to be in furtherance of his life, as long as he respects
That's
the
called
equal right of
stealing, dude.
others to do the same.
Why ought- No,
Hold
why?
on. Can you, dude, you keep interrupting me. What's
Jim
up
Bob,
with
hold
that?
on, let him finish.
What's up with that? So
Yeah, 'cause you're
my
saying
point,
something that
my point was that to assert a right for myself and to deny it to others would be a contradiction. That's why I said that's one of the reasons. I mean, there's multiple others, but that's the relevant one
Michael,
here. It would be a contradiction.
Michael,
Jim Bob said that I didn't say that I contradicted
Michael.
myself when I didn't, but then he said contradictions debunk.
Michael,
So people be
Michael,
the judge.
Michael, the person who's aggressing denies that rights exist for themselves and others. They're winner
Who
take all.
cares?
You just
That's irrelevant.
I let you talk, right? You know, you're interrupting me. You just said a person has the right to pursue their wants and desires so long as they don't aggress. And I said,
Sure.
why can't they aggress, right? And you said, because it would be a contradiction, because that person's assigning rights for themselves and not acknowledging the others. I'm saying, no, there's a hypothetical that happens all the time where the person aggressing totally denies rights for themselves and others. They merely say,
Sure.
I'm going to get mine. That's it.
Okay.
They get mine. They don't talk about rights. They just want to get there.
Okay.
Right?
So let's.
It's not a contradiction.
No. Let's step back and look at this from this point of view. We're looking at two people. If I assert one person has rights, I have to assert that the other person has rights. Both people have rights. Neither has the right to violate the right of the other, because to assert that
You
would
just
be
not
a
hear what I just said?
contradiction. That would be a contradiction.
That's only a contradiction for people who believe in rights.
No, it's not. No,
Yes,
because
it is.
rights are factual. They're not
No, that's
dependent
begging
on
the
belief.
question.
It's not begging the question. I don't
Where
think you
is
know what
where
begging
is a
the
right
question means.
actual in a society that denies rights?
Because the right is not dependent on what the government says or
Where
what
are
anybody else
rights?
says.
Dude, just
I've
answer the
just
question.
hold on. I've just told you. Rights
You're not answering my
emanate.
question,
I've
dude.
answered it 15 times.
Where are
Right?
rights in
I
a place
think
that denies rights?
I think Jim Bob, I think you're not satisfied with his answer, and I can understand why, because you're expecting a specific answer and he's giving something different. I think you're both coming from two very different perspectives, and it's what's causing the conflict in understanding. Michael, you're welcome to continue on.
I kind of forgot where I was, but it doesn't matter. I'll go back to the original thing. Rights are factual descriptions of what human beings have, right? And I've stated it multiple times. If a right is a moral claim to something, which is the definition of the term, a human being has to have the right to that which makes morality possible. His life, his freedom of choice, his rational faculty, all these things. But to assert one person has the right to do these things, but another person doesn't, or this person can violate this person's right, would be a contradiction.
Yeah, for people who acknowledge rights, it's
No,
not a
you
contradiction.
don't have to
Dude,
acknowledge
I just
anything.
let you talk. Shut up for a second.
I'm agreeable. Hold on.
Look, the person who denies rights exist for themselves and others, it's not a contradiction. It's only a contradiction if someone assumes rights exist for themselves. I'm pointing to a scenario, right, where the person and the group, they just go, what are you talking about, rights? Where is the right a fact in the world, right? Trees exist. That's a fact in the world. Lions exist. That's a fact in the world. I want stuff. That's a fact in the world. There are people who want stuff, right? Right? They can act on those desires. That's factual. You're just saying rights are factual, and you're not telling us where, because facts isn't the case that facts relate to reality in some way?
Absolutely.
Okay. So where is the reality of rights existing if two people one can deny them and you can affirm them. The one denying says, hey, dude, I don't see how rights exist if all you're referring to is people want to pursue things, right? They just want to pursue things. There's a group of people who want to pursue, they're warlords, right? They're going to use force and coercion and all this kind of stuff, aggression. They're going to get what they want. You're going to say, hey, bro, you're in a contradiction. They go, no, Michael,
Sure.
I'm sorry. I don't acknowledge rights. Where's the contradiction?
No. They're not
No.
contradicting. They're not contradicting themselves.
Thank you.
The contradiction is if we're having a discussion about who has rights, we would have to say there's equal rights on both sides. We would then identify the aggressors that you're talking about as rights violators.
Okay. So
That's
does
all.
a country have the right to not acknowledge rights?
No.
They don't.
No.
So do you have the justification to invade a country that doesn't acknowledge rights?
It's a very complex question that you're asking. And I'll tell you why.
pretty
Would you,
simple.
hold on. If you're asking me, would a rights respecting government, right? Would that government have the right to remove another government that doesn't respect rights? And I would say, yeah. But again, that's not relevant to what we're talking about.
That's a contradiction.
It's not a contradiction.
It is, because it's
No.
removing the person, the country's choice.
It's defense of
violating their
others.
choice, dude.
It's defense of others. If that country is violating people's rights,
No, no.
you said they were violating rights.
No, they didn't acknowledge rights. Okay. Isn't it possible, Michael, that
Okay. I misunderstood the question. You're
let me
saying, okay, so you're saying
let me give you the hypothetical.
Okay, go
There's
ahead.
a country that denies the Enlightenment concept of a right, right?
Mhm.
This sort of privileged position. You're able to have this, you're able to have that, entitlements without any duties. It's totally possible for a country to acknowledge duties as their main thread of behaviors. And you could say you're violating your duty, you're not fulfilling your duty. And that's where they start judging people, right? That's how they that's how they organize their law, for instance.
Mhm.
They don't need the concept of rights to actually facilitate a society that operates based on duties. So if there's a country that only operates based on duties, and you are a neighboring country that operates based on rights, if they deny rights in their country, you said the denial of rights would justify the invasion of that country.
What I said was, if that government is violating rights, which I assume they were by your question, but you might.
They don't accept that rights exist. They
They
can't
don't
violate
have
something they don't
to.
believe in.
Yeah, of course you can.
Do you believe in sin?
Jim Bob.
Do you believe in sin? Yes or no?
No.
Okay.
Can I sin?
Believe in sin. I believe in sin.
Can I sin?
No, from you can't violate.
No. I'm
can't.
asking you as a fact. Can I sin?
Can you sin? From my perspective, yes, but I can't do anything.
As a
to you, right?
factual matter, can I sin? From your
Yes, you can.
Okay.
From my perspective.
Whether I acknowledge it or not, I can sin. And
No,
whether or not you violate rights, you can violate
Okay,
rights.
cool. So I don't know if you understand what you just did. If a Christian society determines and swaps rights with sin, and they determine that they're going to use force, and if you violate yourself or others from a sin perspective, they can legally use force because you justify the use of force if someone violates rights. If based on that logic,
legally do it, yeah.
Based on that logic, a Christian society could annihilate rights and only swap it out for sin and say, people who sin, we're going to jail you. And you'd have to agree to it.
No, I wouldn't have to agree.
Yeah,
They
you
would be
would.
wrong. No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
Because
Literally
you're
the same
jumping.
model.
No, we're not. Because first of all, because sin doesn't exist.
I
So
say rights don't exist.
I know, but it's a
Hallelujah.
factual matter. Listen,
Unbelievable, this guy.
Jim Bob, there's people that say all
Rights,
kinds of
sin
things that
doesn't
aren't
exist.
true.
I say rights don't exist.
And that's
Prove
why
it.
we're
Prove
debating the subject.
Prove they exist.
I already demonstrated
Prove
it.
they exist.
Just because you don't accept it doesn't mean anything. And because Sarah laughs doesn't mean anything.
Prove they exist.
I
think that's actually a good analogy, recognizing that you just said you don't believe in sin, Michael, correct? And Jim
No.
Bob said you don't believe in sin.
No.
Right.
So
And
I can't
Jim
jail you
Bob
for violating,
does.
right?
But Jim Bob is saying in a hypothetical society in which Christianity says if you sin, we can, enforce X, Y, and Z. But you're saying, well, I don't believe in sin, even though you're living in that society. I don't believe in sin,
Sure.
but they can still enforce, or take away or do all those things. So what Jim Bob is saying, and I just want to make sure the translation is coming over, is switch out sin for rights,
Mhm.
Jim Bob is saying, I don't believe they exist. You're saying they do. So it's the same analogy across the board between the two of you.
So, Sarah, nothing can prevent somebody other than self-defense, obviously. But if somebody wants to violate rights, they can. The point of the matter is that's why we want to convince people of a rational morality and of the existence of rights. That's why, so that you can subordinate might to right. If rights could not be violated, there'd be no need for them. Who would care?
What's
Right. But
Michael,
I think what Jim Bob is saying is that the rights don't exist, right?
I know.
So you
you have to prove they
like,
exist first.
yes.
And what I've said multiple times, I explained the whole theory of morality, right? And then I said, if this is the correct theory of morality, and a right is a moral claim, something you're morally entitled to. If morality means acting in furtherance of my life, then I am morally entitled.
So
to
pagans
do so.
are justified because taking
What do you mean?
over pagans who appeal to war and carnage and taking over societies, they have the declarative right, and it's totally consistent within their systems that they declare they have the right to take over neighboring societies, right? You're not making any distinction between one set of people who define what furthering is for them.
It doesn't matter. It's not a
doesn't
matter of
now?
opinion.
Okay, it doesn't matter.
No, their
So,
opinion.
Are you a moral relativist?
Listen, no, opinion doesn't matter in this. No, you are ascribing to being saying, well, if this person believes this or this person believes that, that would be moral relativism. What I am saying is that it's irrelevant what they believe, that the moral facts are facts. Either something furthers my life or it doesn't. So, I mean, I can drink cyanide and say this. Hold on.
Furthering life, Michael, is ambiguous. Do you understand that one set of a society in one area and a society
really
in
not.
Hold on,
it's
dude.
It's not ambiguous.
Are you aware that a society in one area and a society in another area could totally disagree on what's furthering life?
Of course they can. They can disagree on all kinds of things. They can disagree on the propriety of child sacrifice. Who cares if they they believe?
What do you mean? Who cares? That's checkmate to your entire argument.
No, it's not. You're saying that it's a matter of opinion. It's not. It doesn't matter if they disagree. The fact that you think that's checkmate is really a demonstration of your lack of understanding of the arguments.
If two neighboring societies disagree on what's furthering, they don't agree with your standard of what's furthering.
Okay.
How are you going to tell them they're wrong?
Well, what we would have to do is have a discussion, have a debate. We'd have to try to teach them, learn, whatever. That's how we do things.
That's what we're doing right now. You're the one debating.
So hold on. The fact that you and I disagree, right? Does that demonstrate that neither one of us is correct?
No, but if you're the one,
so if two societies disagree, how does it prove that they're both not correct?
Michael, if you're the one affirming that there's a correct way and the correct way is rights, I'm asking you because you're in the hot seat. If two neighboring societies disagree on what constitutes furthering, what's better for them, I asked you, how are you, Michael, in the hot seat going to determine? You said we're going to debate. We're doing that right now. How are you going? What's the method that you're going to determine that they're wrong about what constitutes furthering their society?
Because it's not furthering their society. We're talking about individual lives, right? There are things now. There's very concrete things that are harmful to a human life. Regularly ingesting heroin and alcohol are just examples that would destroy somebody, right? We could agree to that. That's automatic. We know that. But then there's things that are tougher to figure out. The type of relationships a person gets into, the type of people one hangs out with. Are these things benefiting them? And those are complex questions that you'd have to have, real knowledge of the inner workings of these relationships. The only point, and that's why I stated it clear as day at the beginning, is all we have to show is that all I need to do, rights are a moral claim to something. That's what rights are. That's what they've always been defined as. Rights are a moral claim to something that necessitates a theory of morality. What is morality? And how do we arrive at it? Morality is a code of values adopted by choice. Who adopts values by choice? Human beings. What is a value? Two senses. That which one seeks to gain and or keep, any object or quality desirable as a means in itself. They're in the only entities that give rise to such a subject as, or rather a conclusion as something good or bad, is life. And the
Michael.
only life that can choose are humans.
Michael.
You can say Michael in a condescending voice all you
Don't
want.
get upset. Don't get upset. I'm just trying
I'm not
to
upset.
look, people can have the choice to pursue their desires, correct? Is that still moral?
What do you mean? What
What
are
do I
their
mean?
desires?
Yeah, exactly. So if someone has, I'm trying to get the baseline position is that you think a right is someone's ability to choose and act on their desire, right?
No, I
So
never
what
said
is it
that. Not
then?
even
So
once.
what is it then?
I never said that.
You
I
just
said
said a
no,
right is a moral
no.
claim on acting
Yeah.
on your desire.
No, I didn't. I said a person has a right to act on what they judge to be in their best interest, i.e., what is best for their life. It's not just a desire that happens to
And
come out
what's
of
the
nowhere.
standard for what's best for their life?
Their life.
No, what's the
What do you mean?
standard for what's
Hold on.
best for their life, dude?
That which keeps them alive.
So
hold on, but let me just clarify something here.
You're in trouble
No,
now.
dude.
That which keeps them
here's the thing.
alive, right?
Dude, hold on.
Okay.
In what
You're ready to
world,
commit to that.
dude? No, because you interrupted me. That which keeps them alive, but it's not a temporary survival. It's not survival as a brute. It's a survival as a human being across a lifespan, which means that things have to be intact. It can't be just surviving attached to machines where somebody else has to keep them alive. It has to be survival as a rational entity that can continue to act in furtherance of their life. I don't know, like this tactic you have, oh, you're cooked. And like, I get that plays to an audience, but that's not a real debate tactic.
Yeah, well,
No, it's really not. It's really not.
Dude, listen, the audience gets to decide that, first of all. They have the choice, Michael, to decide that for themselves.
But that doesn't determine the truth or
just let
falsity
you
of
talk.
something.
I just let you talk.
After you interrupted me 100 times.
Do you have anything more to say? I'll let you go.
No, I don't need to. I want to know what Sarah has to say.
Sarah's the moderator. Okay.
Yeah, she's chimed in before. Why can't she chime in now?
Well, listen, you don't have to derail like that. If it's the case that a group of people or an individual gets together with a group of people and they say, you know what we determine is better for us, what's furthering us is to gain in resources through coercion and force. That's what's better for us. Michael comes along and he goes, no. I know you guys can demonstrate that's better for you based on your standard, but I'm asking you to abandon that standard because there's a moral fact here that your pursuit of what you want isn't actually better for you. Well, how do you determine what's better for someone if they're just deciding we're going to take what's mine, I'm going to move from location to location, and I'm going to use force and coercion and aggression and threats, and I'm going to gain resources, I'm going to gain water, I'm going to gain food, I'm going to gain women, I'm going to gain slaves, all of that. They determine that that's what's best for them, Michael. From your moral system, how are you going to tell them that that's wrong, given that that's your system?
Okay, first of all, if we're back to the original point that I made, that nobody has the right to violate the rights of others, which they would be doing, whether they knew it or not, whether they believed it or not. Now, if you're asking me, how do I demonstrate to people that initiating force and using violence isn't actually in their interest? Well, I would say Adolf Hitler thought that he could go and conquer Czechoslovakia. He was going to take the Sudetenland, and that was going to be great for him. He was going to invade Poland. He was going to establish the 1,000-year Reich, right? How did that work out for him?
That's a fallacious argument.
It's not a fallacious argument because we can see it over and over again. That
so if something's good, it survives. That's your argument.
Not just survives.
That's literally your argument. Is that see how it went for them? It went badly.
It went badly for them.
You can point to societies like Islam's doing fairly well using their methods. No.
Not really. No, they're constantly at war with one another. That's the first thing. Secondly, within their societies, you have to ask whether they're prospering. But again, we're deviating from the original topic, the original question. And I told you, rights come from the nature of human beings as rational entities with freedom of choice, moral entities with freedom of choice. That's where rights come from.
Hold on a second. The opposite comes from humans too.
What?
the opposite of acknowledging rights still comes from humans who
Sure.
use their rationality to determine what they want and to act on what they want. So
what?
you're saying rights come from the rational human acting on choice, and I'm saying
that's not what I said. I never said that. I've never said that. Never, not once.
Everything that's antithetical to rights also comes from the same source.
So what? What does that mean? That has nothing
So
to do
why
with the
should
topic.
given that rights are, by the way, if someone violates, in your instance, give me an example of a violation of a right. Just a simple example, just really clear.
If I decide that I'm going to, after the show, walk to the store and somebody comes up to me and punches me in my face and takes my wallet.
Okay. So where in the exchange was the right?
The right is my right to make my decision to go to the store. If the person attacks me, I am then morally justified in responding in self-defense.
Where the question, Michael, is where in the exchange
I just told you a right is a right to action. I just told you where it is.
The right to action. The other guy took an action. He used his right to action. I'm asking you a very specific
That's not
question.
his right.
Yeah, dude, that's question begging. I'm asking you.
It's not question. Do you even know what these terms mean?
Where in the exchange physically that's happening? You're walking to the store, someone aggresses you.
Right.
In the exchange, where is the right?
Jim Bob, you're assuming that you have to have a physical right, but you don't. Where when two people are walking down the street, where is the friendship?
Well, can I
Where,
ask, because I'm still having a hard time ensuring I understand your position completely, but you mentioned earlier that the right is, having that decision to do something in the best interest of your life and to thrive.
Go ahead, say that again, Sarah. I'm sorry. What did you say?
You said the right stems from a person's ability to like choose the best interest for themselves, right? Their life.
I said that the right stems from a human, the nature of a human being as a moral entity. That's where rights stem from.
Okay. So I want to flip that because I want to understand it from the guy who punches you.
Sure.
Right. Is that his right to come and punch you based on what you're...
No.
So, well, because you're saying it's like, it's natural and it's human, right? We're born and we have it, correct?
Yes.
Based on that.
No, well, hold on. We're born and we have it. I'm not prepared. That's a complex question that has to do with children and what their decision-making capacities are and what rights they have. And that's something that I haven't really delved a lot into.
Okay. Maybe that's a starting point then. At what point does a person's rights begin based on what you're saying?
For absolute certainty, once a person is making choices on their own.
Hold
on. That point.
Okay, hold on.
At that point, that person can, when a person is making free choices, that person can behave morally or immorally, rightly or wrongly.
So
hold on. Oh, can I just ask Sarah if that answered her question? That's what I want to know. Because you were going to go somewhere else.
I think that kind of answers it, but that actually runs me down a whole nother line. And I think Jim Bob's going to go down that same line.
So if someone's incapable of making choices, do they have no rights to live?
Honestly, I'm going to be honest with you. It's a very difficult question to answer. It's something that I have not delved into a lot, and I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if I don't know, I don't know.
Well, no. If
I don't know the answer to the question.
I know, but the answer is an entailment of your statement. So entailments are answers that are consequential to your statement. So if your statement is the rights exist when a person's becomes capable, or maintains the capability of making choices and acting on the choices, right, in a meaningful way. There are plenty of people who can't do that on their own. Do they just not have rights?
Well, what do you mean can't do it on their own?
They can't make choices.
No. What I'm saying, are you talking about somebody, for instance, that's in a wheelchair? Or are you talking about somebody that doesn't have the mental capacity to make choices?
Capacity, like a dysfunctional autistic person.
Okay. In that case, I'm telling you, I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, no, the answer is already answered by your standard.
But it's not.
What do you mean? You can't contradict your standard and be like, you know what?
No.
I declare that someone has rights when they're capable of X, Y, Z. And then when they're not, you go, well, I'm not sure about that.
Well, okay. No, I'm telling you that
bite the bullet.
There may be an argument for it. I ultimately do not know. You might be right about this. It's something I'm not going to answer you on the fly when it's a topic I haven't thought about. or I haven't come to definitive conclusions on. I'm not just going to say, I agree that what you're saying
Okay.
has some sense to
You,
it. I'm
you
not
never
going to
you
deny
never
that.
thought about this. Okay. Does everyone under
Mm.
your view have the right to own a gun?
Does everyone have the right to own a gun? I don't know about everyone. I
mean?
mean, that's a broad thing. I told you at the beginning, I'm not going to list a catalog of rights and say everything a human being
Okay.
has a right to,
Okay.
because I don't know.
Okay, cool. Well, if it's the case that in a society that appeals to rights, and you can't tell me if everyone should be able to have the right to own a gun, that you're basically conceding that the government could actually come in and determine certain people don't have some rights and some people do have rights based
Hold
on
on.
some sort of criteria, which you already conceded to. Your criteria was mental criteria. We already
No, it's
demonstrated
not
that people,
only mental
people
criteria.
don't
No,
all have the right to vote. People don't all have the right to own a gun.
no,
Based on the
I can't.
situation, we can remove those rights. It
Because you're saying
demonstrates
things
that
I never
government gives you
said.
rights. It's not
No,
inherent
no,
in
no, I
any
haven't.
reality.
I never, no, nothing I said demonstrated. Of course, the government can violate your rights. I said this 15 times. I don't know why I have to keep saying it.
No, dude.
A government can
It's worse
violate
than
your
that.
rights. Individuals can violate your rights. The entire reason we need rights is because they can be violated.
Okay.
If they couldn't be violated, there would be no concept. There'd be
Okay,
no
Michael,
reason to
if it's
elucidate
the
it.
case that not everyone has the right to own a gun,
I
isn't
didn't
it the
say that. Hold on. I didn't say it's the case
does
that not
everyone have
everyone
the
has the
right
right
to
to
own a
gun.
gun?
I said I don't know because I
That's such
don't.
a cop out.
It's not a cop out.
Yeah,
I
it
haven't
is.
thought about that topic. So I have to give you an answer to every single hypothetical question you're going to
That's
ask
a
me.
really clear, relevant hypothetical, dude.
What I will say to you is this: everybody has a right to self-defense.
Except
That I
not
will
the
say.
tools to self-defense. That makes a lot of sense.
No, I didn't say they didn't have the right. I said I don't know. What
Okay,
do you
if
want
every-
me to do?
if-
Lie and say I've thought about this? I know
Look,
the answer.
Michael, if everyone
All
has
I'm
the-
prepared to say is that human beings are moral entities, and because we're moral entities, we have rights. That's it. I'm not going to catalog every potential right a person
if
can
everyone
have.
has a right to self-defense, but not everyone has a right to equal mechanisms of self-defense. For instance, let's say everybody's had the right and obligation to own a firearm and carry it on them. And there's some people, you said, well, I don't know if everyone has the right to own a gun. In the instance where everyone else has a firearm and some do not, how does it follow that they actually have the right to defend themselves if you're restricting their capability of defending
Here's
themselves?
why. Because and this is, again, beyond the scope of what we were supposed to be talking about, which is where do rights come from? You're trying to argue about specific rights that a person has in society. But when people have rights, there's also ways you can forfeit your rights. For instance, if I go in, like I spent 25 years in prison, right? Because I violated people's rights. I used physical violence against multiple people. So I was justifiably deprived of my rights. So is it just or is it right to deprive me from having a gun? Probably, because I've demonstrated myself not responsible with the weapon.
I understand your hypothetical, but who or
That's not
what?
a hypothetical. I just gave you a factual case.
Who in that scenario took away your rights?
Well, here's where this is
You
the
can't
point.
answer
No,
question,
I can't. I can answer the
Who
direct
in that
question.
scenario took away your rights?
Who? What do you mean? Who deprived me of my rights? Oh, the state of Connecticut did.
State, great. So the state took away your rights. Your assumption is that everyone has rights. It's a part of nature of being a human being. If the state can take away the rights, isn't it the fact that the state could actually give you back your rights?
Hold on. I'm going to answer you.
Rights,
do you mean my legal rights or my natural individual rights?
What else are we meaning here?
From the very start, rights precede the theory of rights. The idea of rights necessarily must precede government.
Really?
Not every government.
No.
Not every government. What I'm saying is we form a just government. A rights respecting government is formed based on the nature of rights, based on a theory of rights. So yes, obviously a government can violate rights, but that doesn't mean they grant them. That's not the same thing.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me clarify for you, John. There are legal rights that they create, but that's a different type of right than what we're talking about.
Okay. So there's rights to have a gun or vote and do this or that, right? And you
Do
just
I
said,
get to ask any questions, or is it just all
oh,
him
I'm not,
asking me?
I don't make the positive position. You're in the
No, I'm
defense.
asking her though. It's Sarah. You're the moderator. You said we
Well,
could
you
ask each
possibly
other
ask me.
questions. Is
So-
it just him asking me? Because that's all we've been doing the whole.
You're the
That's
affirmative, bro.
part of taking the affirmative
Oh,
stance.
okay. All right.
The
But
negative
that-
typically, so it's especially because he's like a hard negative stance. He's saying it absolutely doesn't exist, right? You're saying it does exist. So you have
Mhm.
the absolute
Okay.
affirmative.
All right. Okay. No, that's fine. That's cool.
That doesn't mean you're not allowed to ask questions. He's just trying to dig into, and I'm still a little. I feel like, I think you like if you.
Can I say something
The
to you,
way
Sarah?
you guys define rights are two completely different things. His is based like Jim Bob is recognizing rights based on like what the government grants
Right,
or
okay.
protects, right?
What's the
You're
distinction?
defining rights based on like you just automatically have it.
And Michael, you brought that up too.
Hold
by
on
the
a
way,
second.
just to be
Can I
fair, you
answer
brought
Sarah
in
real
that you got
quickly?
your rights revoked, right?
No,
You're the one who brought in legal rights, not me.
No. Well, you've been invoking the concept of legal
Well, what's
rights.
the distinction
all
for the
along.
audience?
Well, hold
myself?
on.
That's
Legal rights.
that's
Okay.
where I need
So
the
Sarah,
clarity because
Sarah,
you're
that's
talking
what I'm going
about
to
two
answer for you, Sarah.
Okay.
So and that's why in the beginning, if you note at the very beginning of my statement, I said in this context, because governments can say that you have a right to, for instance, healthcare, or you have a right to housing. People argue that you have a right to a job. Franklin Roosevelt famously, developed the new Bill of Rights and said you had all kinds of rights. Those are called in literature or in legal discourse positive rights. Those are things that government grants you. But if you look up natural rights are things that exist independent of what a government says. The manner in which I defined rights as a moral claim to something, that is what historically has been referred to as natural rights, or in the present context, how I would rather refer to them as individual rights, but I'm okay with natural rights too. So you're correct, Sarah. There's a distinction. There's two different types of rights. Obviously, there's the right in the legal sense where the government grants things and says you can do this or that. The object is what the natural rights philosophers did, what natural law philosophers have been arguing back since the Stoics in ancient Rome. And even you can go back to the Sophists in pre-Christ in ancient Greece, argued that the law ought to be on the side. So you'd have legally granted right. The legally protected rights are in line with natural rights. Now, I want to just say something quickly here about this. I've debated philosophers, economists, professors on this subject. Nobody ever has a hard time understanding what we're talking about. Ever.
Wow.
Listen, I will say, go watch my debate with Walter Block, David
You're
Friedman.
not
Watch
watching
it
debates
here.
right now, dude.
I have to ask. Okay, so if you're saying that the natural right is what we'll call it going forward is based
Okay.
on morality, right? Then where
Yes.
is that morality derived from?
And that morality, as I said earlier, morality is a code of values adopted by choice. That's a moral code. There's different moral codes, right? You have a Christian moral code. You have a
Is your
Islamic
definition
moral code.
is your definition cyclical then? Because it sounds
Why
like
ought we
one
why
depends
ought we
on the
value
other.
morally choice? Why ought we value choice?
Here's where the main thing comes in. If you want to live, and I'm assuming anybody that's asking how I should live is interested in living, there are certain things that you have to do in order to live. It's that simple. There's certain actions that you have to take. There's certain things that are good for you and certain things that are bad for you. That's a code of morality. It's a teleological code of morality.
Dude,
Deontological codes do not preempt
I
the field.
already debunked this because
You didn't debunk anything. You just said.
Dude, I can just give you an example of another group of people who simply
That
says,
doesn't matter.
no, listen, I can give an example of a group of people who they define that what's best for them is to take shit, right?
Right.
That's a view that they can take, right? From your view, why ought we value choice?
We ought to value choice. Well, first of all, it's not even a matter of value.
Here he
choice.
goes.
We have choice. Dude, listen, hold up.
Here he goes down the path
No,
over here.
because you're not. Here's the
All
thing.
right,
And here's the
all
thing.
right.
We could get going
Dude.
now. Listen, here's the thing.
Stop
We could get going.
You're
No,
obfuscating.
you're obfuscating because ultimately
You're
you
running.
don't understand.
Oh, I
That's
don't understand.
the problem.
Gaslight me now.
No,
Answer
you
the
don't.
question.
I answered it 15
All right.
times.
Why ought
You
we
don't
value choice?
understand. first of all, I never said we ought to value choice.
Why
Never once
ought we
made the
value
claim.
choice?
I never made the claim.
Oh, you
But
never
we
made the
ought-
claim
but
you ought
hold
to
on,
value
but
choice.
we hold on. But I'll tell you why. I'll answer the question. But I never made the claim.
Hold up.
Hey,
If-
JB
if-
Pelletier, you stop crying.
What?
I'm
He's
talking
talking
to the super chat.
Oh, sorry. I was like, what?
No, not you. You're not. You're not
Oh,
crying.
gentlemen.
You're obstreperous, but I'll grant you're not crying.
Fair enough. All right. Okay. So you're saying we not ought,
No.
or we ought.
Listen.
I'm so confused. at what you're
We ought to value choice.
Why?
I should value my choice because choice, if I don't have choice, I can't act in furtherance of my long-term best interest. That's why I should value choice.
Okay. Isn't it the case that someone can define their long-term best interest as terrestrial gain by force, by
They
negating
can,
choice?
and
Yeah?
they would be wrong.
Why?
Because
Morally.
ultimately, okay, hold on. I'll answer you. Because ultimately, as human beings, we're rational beings. It's in our interest to deal with one another as rational beings. If I initiate force against you, I'm violating your rational faculty. I'm
No, you're not.
denying you the ability, of course I am,
No,
to
I'm not.
deal with
No, you're
me
not.
based on
That's
choice.
just an
Of
assertion.
course I am. See, that's the inherent problem with these kind of debates, right? I get this is like a shock jock kind of debate thing, but you ask me a question, I attempt to answer it, and you
Let me
jump in
give you
and
back
start-
what you said.
No, go ahead. Tell me what I said. Given how
I asked-
many things I said that you got wrong already, let's see
you're
if you
just gonna
get this
stop.
wrong.
Okay, cool. So if it's the case where a group can say, well, I'm going to use my choice to pursue my best interest is to take shit from people and use
Yes.
force to do it. That's
Yeah.
proven to be advantageous to my self-interest. You said, well, that's morally wrong because a rational person does the opposite.
That's not what I said.
Yeah, it is.
It's not, no, it's not. It's not even
It's
close.
exactly what you
It's
said.
not even close to what I said.
Of course it is.
No, it's not. And
You're
anybody
saying a
that
rational person
No.
considers other
Hold on.
people, right?
No, what I said to you was that we all are human beings' mode of survival is our rational faculty. That's what I said. I said it's in my interest to deal with other rational people, to allow them to be rational, not to subvert their rational faculty. It's far more advantageous to trade with people than it is to loot people. That's what I said. That's why
Really?
it's a mistake to think that as an individual, you listen. 25 years in prison, I was surrounded by people who thought they could pursue their own interests by violating the rights of others, by initiating force. What happened to them? How did that do for them?
That's in
Once
prison.
you initiate force against, no, they weren't in prison when they acted. They were out of prison. When you initiate force against somebody else, you risk your life, you risk your safety.
Really?
If you're in a society, you risk
Does
your
that include
society.
the threat of force?
The who?
Does that include the threat of force?
What do you mean? Explain.
Okay, you said when you initiate force on people,
Yeah,
you
I would.
risk
Oh, okay.
X, Y,
Yes. I would include.
Does that
the
include the
force.
threat of force?
Yes. it
Are
does.
rights completely sustained by the threat of force?
Our
Rut
right.
row.
Hold on. No, not rut row. No, there's no rut row involved.
Oh, I need
No.
another beer.
Dude.
You
Premise
guys.
You
one.
can listen. Have
me
as
give you
much.
back- let me
Listen.
give you
Hold on.
back
No.
to you.
Hold on a
You're
Let
second.
him,
shit now.
Jim Bob,
No,
let
I'm
him
not.
respond. Jim
See,
Bob,
that's the
let
whole
him
thing with this
respond.
style, dude. You can't
The
actually
style where I
engage
refute you?
intellectually. You didn't refute a thing.
You're
You
in
made a
trouble.
statement.
You're
The
mumbling.
threat of
You don't
force.
even know what
If
to
you're,
say.
dude, if you're talking about,
Gentlemen,
if
we
you're
can
talking
argue about
about-
arguing, or we can just make. the point.
I'm ready to answer the question.
Go ahead.
If you're
Michael.
talking about a threat of force, meaning what defensive force, that does protect rights. If I didn't clarify, then I apologize. The threat of defensive force, meaning if you take my rights, I'm going to defend myself. That's perfectly okay because self-defense, that's the whole point that we started with.
Oh, really?
That is allowable.
Well, does the
The threat of the initiation of force
Does the
is
government
wrong.
sustain the concept of rights in our system?
In America, you mean?
Yeah.
In some senses, yeah. In some senses, no. In
Does the
some senses,
government-
it protects rights. In some senses, it violates rights.
Is the government actually coming back to defend you self-defense wise? No.
Was
They're not-
retaliatory force.
No.
I-
No. Hold on a second.
Well, what do you mean?
Look, no, this is very important here because
We've
if
lost
you're
our
saying-
moderator.
if you're saying that self-defense is justifiable use of force, right? That's
Sure.
the threat of force. If you do this, I'm going to do this back to you.
Sure.
Okay, I understand that.
Okay.
The problem is the government, which is the body that sustains whether or not it was just or not. So let's say I break into your house, Michael, and you believe it's totally just to use a gun on me, right? Right. Even if you believe that's just, isn't it the case that you still have to outsource a deliberation to an authority to figure out whether or not it actually was just or not?
Oh, I would say, yeah. That's actually, can I just tell you, I think it's a good question. And the reason I think it's a good question, because this is actually where I disagree with many libertarians and anarchists.
I understand.
Because you have to have an objective body, somebody that can put in the procedures, say due process, determine the amount of people on a jury. What I'm
saying is you said, and I agree with you, that if someone aggresses you, you're in the position to defend yourself. To determine whether it's just in this system relies on another entity that monopolizes the force.
I agree.
And their monopoly of the force actually isn't in defense of you or your property. So you have this other use of force, coercive force, threat of force, that actually isn't in the category of self-defense.
Well, the question then would come down to, I think you're talking about retaliatory force. If I'm wrong, tell me.
Retaliation would be, I enter your house and you're
no. But so, you're talking about to judge me.
Yeah, they're going to have to judge you. Yeah,
whether or not I was. Yeah, they're not defending me in that case.
Right.
What they're doing is they're acting as the arbiter of whether retaliatory force would be justified in case of this guy.
But that system,
or a woman, I guess you didn't say.
Isn't that system that's mediating whether or not you did the right thing? Isn't that system completely and wholly dependent on the threat of force?
There's a difference, and this is the key. No, you can giggle and laugh, but
I'm giggling and laughing.
Is there not a difference between the threat of initiation of force and a threat of retaliatory force?
The threat of initiated force is
Does it differ from retaliatory?
Do this, right? Yeah, there's a difference. But here's the thing, Michael, I'm trying to get you to understand this, is that the government points at you and says, you better follow rights. How is that a not initiated force?
Because what it's doing,
you better follow rights.
It's not initiated force.
That's not initiating force?
No, because what they're telling you is, if you violate somebody's rights, we're going to retaliate against you.
Yeah, that's initiating force.
That's not initiating
pointing a gun
force.
And saying,
that's part of retaliatory force.
No.
It is. Yes, it is.
Look. If the government comes in and says, you better acknowledge rights and behave that way, otherwise, this gun, right? How I know this is true is because there's other countries that doesn't have the system of governance we do. They don't have the body of force. They don't have that force applicator that says, guys, we're all pointing a gun at you, by the way. And we're telling you, you better behave the way we dictate you behave. And if you don't behave this way, here's the gun. That's completely use of initiated force on a society.
I think I missed something. If I say to you, if you go and you punch Sarah, that I'm going to restrain you, that is not a threat of initiated force. It's a threat of retaliatory force.
I'm saying the judger of whether or not you were just is saying, we have a system of behaviors that we permit and don't permit. We're going to decide, because we're the monopoly with the gun. We're going to decide if you were just. Michael, your philosophy doesn't actually decide if you're just or not. Do you know that?
Oh, no. Well, the problem is, obviously, and I can't imagine you would disagree with this. Governments can behave unjustly, right?
Yeah, I agree, but that's irrelevant to the point.
No, it's not.
No, it's irrelevant. Why? Because what we're talking about is there's an instance in which someone aggresses on you, and then you retaliate, right?
Yes.
What I'm saying is, in an ordered society that you want to appeal to rights and acknowledge rights, that ordered society actually appeals to another group of people with guns that is constantly initiating force, right?
And what I'm saying is that's not
you violate. Force. No, they're saying if you do the wrong thing, they're literally pointing a gun the entire time. The reason I know this is, if you go to a society that doesn't appeal to rights or a constitution or a Bill of Rights and civil rights and all these things, right? There is no system that the two parties can appeal to, let's say in the woods, right? But you said these things are natural, but the reality is, if you go to what constitutes natural, what's what seems to be aggression. Maybe people are not aggressive. What what constitutes what occurs is different than what ought to occur. And so that's
I agree.
So if it's the case that you're basically in a performative contradiction to say, well, I believe in rights because if you violate rights and you use initiated force or initiated aggression or coercion to say, if you do X, I will do this. You're saying don't do that. And yet the very system that you're arguing for that's just needs to do that. They literally need to do that.
No, because it wouldn't
Who
be
established rights exist.
Hold on, listen, let me answer your question. If you had a just government, that's what we're going to assume for the sake of this discussion right now. If a just government, by just government, I mean a government that is instituted and restricts itself only to protecting rights, not to violating rights, right? If that government threatens people, if you violate rights, we're going to get you. That's not the threat of initiated force. It's a threat of retaliatory force.
No, because if someone
they're threatening to retaliate against somebody that used force.
Let's put it this way. Do you disagree? Like, do you agree, Michael, that
Go ahead.
You can believe whatever you want so long as you don't use force to manipulate others into that belief system?
Say that again.
Do you agree that the statement, well, you believe what you want, I don't have any problem with people believing anything. Where I have a problem is when you initiate force to force those beliefs on people. Do you agree with that?
Do I think that you should be able to initiate?
No, the opposite. Sorry, I worded it all sloppy. Do you agree that you can have your beliefs, but I have a problem once you use force to force those beliefs onto people?
To force beliefs onto people?
Yeah, like your beliefs.
No, you
structure society based on your
the
beliefs.
The only proper use of force is in defense or retaliatory force.
I understand, but if that's true, you're
not forcing your beliefs. You're not forcing them to believe what you want.
If that's true, what you just said, then you don't need a justice system.
No, I believe you do. And I mean, the problem is, listen, hold on. You and I mean, ultimately we can have that discussion at another occasion. I would just reference people to, if you want to see a debate about the point that Jim Bob just made, I debated Professor Humer, Professor Block, and Liquid Zulu, and Professor David Friedman, all on the very topic of whether or not you need a justice system to enforce rights. I'm afraid, I mean, we've got 2 minutes left, but we don't have enough time to debate that specific issue.
That's fine, but I just want to point out.
But I will say this. I believe that in order to have a rights respecting society, you ultimately do need an organization that has a monopoly on force, and we refer to that organization as government. Okay. Libertarians disagree.
I understand, but if that's the case, then it's not just inherent and natural, because if it was just natural that you have the right to defend yourself, then you wouldn't need an external mediator to determine whether or not you were
Why not?
just or not. What?
Why not?
What?
I don't
You
understand.
could just declare that you were just and self.
No, you couldn't, because I can declare all kinds of things that are false.
Yeah.
That's the problem. You can declare a falsity. I could declare, like, for instance, your argument is when I say that rights exist, I'm making a false claim, right?
You're making an unjustified claim.
Okay.
I don't know if it's false.
Well, okay, you're saying that I'm not justifying my claim. So obviously people can say things that aren't true. So somebody can claim to be justified when they aren't. That's irrelevant to the fact of the case.
So this is the thing. If it's the case where an interaction happens between two individuals and you need to outsource whether or not it's just, then the just or moral, the morality and the justness of the situation itself isn't contained in the situation itself. It needs.
What do you mean by contained?
It's
a fact. Okay, I think I know.
There's a fact of the matter about right or wrong in a scenario, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay. If that's the case, that actually we both agree that actually necessitates a monopoly on a justice system that basically mediates and litigates what the hell happened and whether or not it's just or not. But what I'm saying is that if your moral claim is that people should have choice, it's the fact that you actually support a system that you couldn't use your choice to deny. You'd be like, I don't like a justice system. You couldn't say that, right? I don't want a justice system. I just want natural engagement between people, right?
Hold on a
anarchists.
second. Hold on. Would a person be justified in, is that what you're asking me, in saying they don't want to be a part of that system?
If it's their choice that the best thing for them in society is to not have a justice system,
Yeah.
I'm not sure from your standard you could actually argue against it.
What I would say to him, and this is what I have said to the aforementioned anarchists that I debated, is as long as you are not violating anyone else's rights, I don't care what you do. It doesn't matter. You don't have to. You don't have to acknowledge
as long as you
the system.
believe what I believe.
No,
right?
because if they go and rob somebody, that's it. It's an objective fact they've committed a robbery, right?
Only
It's
if there's a justice system.
Why? You don't have to have a justice system to rob.
Well, no, then you need an absolute moral standard against thievery. Can
I just tell you guys something real quickly? I'm getting an abundance of texts from people telling me about this debate. I wish they would get in on the screen so that everybody can see their comments. Pay the $5 or whatever it is so that we can discuss what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, like, if it's the case that someone said, well, I don't believe what you believe in, right? I always bring this up against atheists because if I have a belief in sin, like I brought up before, right, which is parallel, it's like I believe that people act and there's a moral reality of action, right? And there's a standard to measure it against God, right? And so that to me is similar to the concept of a right, right? Because you're basically saying this behavior is not permitted here. And it's based on a fundamental belief. Your fundamental belief is rights exist. But if someone has the choice to deny that rights exist, and they have the choice to organize a society based on rights not existing, I'm not sure what your position could say on it, being that you'd have to violate their belief structure to
hold on one
impose
second.
the concept of rights on them.
Would it be, are you arguing for like a happy and covenant community where everybody in the community agrees to live a certain way?
Yeah, like that's why I brought up duties. Yes.
Oh, okay. So if you're a Christian, I don't want to make assumptions. I just believe you are.
Yeah.
So if you and say 100 people decide that you're going to live in a community, right? And your community is going to consist of the schools teach religion, you're going to practice the Bible, that sort of thing. You have every right to do that. What you don't have the right to do is force that onto somebody else.
I know, but what if everyone, Michael, in that society agrees?
I just said if everyone agrees, you wouldn't be violating their rights because it would be consensual.
Okay, so you admit that rights could actually be overturned and negated based on agreement.
No,
Yes,
I don't know what you. No. Hold on. What do you? They're not. No. What do you mean over? I don't know exactly what you mean.
If a society that's closed off can all come together, including the people you're calling the victims, they come together and say, you know what? We don't believe in rights. In fact, we trust each other so much that an act of aggression is actually permitted because we trust the deontology system that we have. Even if you thought it was a violation of rights, I'll give you an example. What if I took someone's gun from them in a Christian covenant community, and you from the outside, Michael, thought that was unjust, but the Christian thought it was just? How would you determine whether or not it violated their rights or not?
That's an interesting question. I ultimately, if it's in a consensual community where everybody pre-agreed to the rules, I would have a very hard time arguing that an external force could go in there and rightfully deprive them or do anything to them, because they had the right to make that choice and to enter into that consensual agreement. Okay. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand. But that means
the person's right isn't actually being violated.
Yes, that means that you just conceded that from your view, based on that concession, that rights are just an agreement. There's nothing actual.
No, I did not, because I said they had the right to agree to that community. By the way, that also entails the right to get out if they want to.
Well, I mean, that's just presupposing that rights exist. We spent
the last
if a country
hour and
agrees,
35 minutes arguing
if a
about
country
right,
agrees that there's no rights, right? They just have like a purge system where it's just like, well, you have a general standard of morality and conduct that's traditional or something, like, some sort of ongoing tradition. It's just the way of the land. This is how we've done it all along.
And everybody in there agrees to it.
No, not everyone. Maybe there's 4 people that don't agree, but the fact is, so long as that country agreed generally on it, right? Because I'm an outlier in my own country. I don't believe rights exist. And I believe that
Most people don't.
I know, but
You're not an outlier.
Well, no,
most people don't believe that.
If I redefine rights, I'll agree that they exist. I'll define it in a way that I agree. Okay. A set of permitted behaviors and restricted behaviors exist in a society that's governed by a monopolized standard body of force. You can do this. You can't do this. Could they change it? Yeah, they can change it. They could actually make it so we couldn't do something that you and I thought we definitely our right to do. Like they can just change that based on force. So what I'm saying, Michael, is the only thing you're really pointing to, Michael, is that force exists. And then some set of agreements exist. And sometimes when you merge force with agreements, you get some type of system.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
But earlier on, you said you have the right to invade another country if they're violating rights. But now, if they agree that in their country they don't acknowledge rights, it's not a violation.
No,
And
what I said is
I'm going to let Michael have the last thought here, and then Jim Bob will move into closing statements. So you'll be
okay. No, what I'm saying is that if everybody in a given community, now obviously the larger you expand that out, the more people included, the less chance you're going to have of universal agreement, right? Like Amish societies, Quaker societies, those types of societies are close-knit, small societies agree to live by certain rules. If people all agree to live a certain way, that's their right to do so. Now, there might be, I mean, I can think of hypotheticals where I would say, no, I wouldn't allow that. And they would, if they're raping and torturing women, I don't think that a woman 1 week can say, you know what, 5 years from now, if I don't wear the parka or whatever, everybody can gang rape me. I would have a real issue with that. And I would say they're violating our rights. But generally speaking, people can form communities and live how they want. If a government of a country is actually violating rights, meaning they're using force against someone, that person has not consented to it. If the government does that, then somebody else has the right to remove them. That was my only point.
Look, Michael, I didn't consent to rights.
You don't have to.
I didn't consent that rights exist.
But you don't have to.
Does the government violate? Look, no, that's a contradiction. If I didn't consent to
rights, it's not a contradiction.
I didn't consent to
living. Hold on. If you don't consent that you have arms, does that make your arms disappear?
No, these are reference, right?
No.
In today's age.
Okay.
I didn't.
So what do we got to do?
If I don't consent that rights exist, you're basically in a contradiction.
No, I'm not in a contradiction. No,
that means the government has to enforce this belief in rights, right, against my consent.
Let's go ahead and move into closing statements, gentlemen. We will be able to do open panel, so you'll still be able to have. And we also have the super chats too.
I can stay till 10:30, maybe a little after, but I'm already ready to fall asleep. I'm kind of old.
Are you on Eastern Standard Time?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm usually asleep by now, or getting ready to fall asleep.
We'll run through this as quickly as we can. Okay. Jim Bob, if you want to give your closing statement, please.
No, thank you for moderating. Thanks, Michael, for jumping on. As a kind of a quick debate here. The question of tonight's debate is, where do rights come from, right? Ultimately, what is the ontology of rights? What's the status of rights? No matter how many times I debate this with people, the people who are affirming rights exist, they can't tell me in which ways they exist, absent that there's just a monopoly of force saying they exist. And if you disagree, we're going to actually put you in jail. If you act in a way in disagreement that rights exist, we're going to jail you, which ironically is the thing Michael has been arguing against, which is this threat of initiated force to say, believe rights exist or else, right? The point is, if rights are anything more than a set of behaviors that you're allowed to do or not allowed to do, if they're more than that, I'm all ears. But when it comes down to it, when you start debating this, the descriptions always come down to where you're allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do that, which is completely consistent with my view, right? His view of rights is that it's a moral claim. Okay, a moral claim to what? A moral claim to pursue what you want so long as you don't violate the moral claim. Well, that doesn't tell me why that's a morally good claim or a valid claim. It just is a tautology. How do you know what a right is? It's a moral claim. Well, how do you know what a justified moral claim is? Well, it's a justified moral claim so long as it doesn't violate the moral claim. Well, what's the moral claim? Well, you can do whatever you want so long as it doesn't violate someone else's rights, the thing in question, okay? Well, I don't apparently have the right to deny rights and act that way in society. So obviously there's some restrictions here as far as what I can act on and what I can't. My argument, which is counter to his, is that the only thing you're really arguing in reality is that there is a monopolized system of force that potentially has an ethical system or not, that's basically delineating law from that system, and it's telling you what you can and can't do. That's what's going on. How do I know this? Because you can go to any other country that doesn't have a constitution or anything else that you think is good, and nowhere in reality can you find a right. All you see is the absence of a standardized system of force. Ironically, you don't get to consent to that, by the way. The country itself, the nation itself, was defined and declared without some sort of consent. Should we start a country? Should we fight? What do you think we should do here? No, it was a flag in the ground with a bunch of guns that said, we're going to just establish this thing. We're going to establish an independent system. We're going to do it. And if you disagree, you're at war with us. That to me is literally terrestrial gain. I'm not against it, by the way. I'm not arguing against it. What I'm arguing for is an accurate description of what's actually happening. And what's actually happening is nowhere in these exchanges is there a thing called rights. There's only a set of circumstances, whether you were in the right or in the wrong, and that ultimately has to be informed by an ethical system. And the ethical system, from Michael's view, I'm not actually sure. The ethical system seems to be just don't violate people's stuff, dude. Don't take their stuff. Don't be a dick, basically. Well, I demonstrated, we could use countless examples of where maybe both of us would agree that you would actually violate their autonomy, their consent to stop something from horrifically happening. I want to also point out that as standard for what constitutes someone has a choice, that they're dignified in their choice and their pursuit of what they find good, is that they are rational, that they have some reasoning faculties. You'll notice that when I cornered Michael on this and I asked, well, what about those who don't have reasoning faculties? He said, I don't know. I just don't know how to answer this. That wasn't the first time he said, I don't know. There were a couple of corners there. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Guns.
Where he just did. Yeah, guns. Guns is good. Thank you for reminding me. So guns. Yeah. Does everyone have the right to own a gun? Well, he said, I don't know. I appreciate he said, I don't know. Maybe that's something to think about. But if you don't know, just know that your objective standard for what constitutes someone's right is actually conditional. So if it's conditional, there's another objective standard for what determines the conditions. And so it keeps going out to a larger worldview, for instance. So from my view, if I were to counter this with a positive from a Christian lens, I would ask everyone in the chat who thinks they have a sworn allegiance to rights, I would ask you to consider, what if it was the case that your life actually, that you could live your life based on duties. And if you have a consistent, coherent system of duties and moral duties, I would argue Christianity, specifically Orthodox Christianity, if you have those duties, a lot of times you're not actually going to violate the things that Michael thinks is a violation of rights. But you don't need the concept of rights for that thing to not be violated. You don't even need to point to it if you have a set of duties. The reason duties are important is because under Michael's position, and I know he's not a libertarian, glory to God, he's one step at least away from that, is that when it comes down to decency, which we didn't get into today, does he have the right to stop someone from hurting themselves or ending their life from his view or not? Is that a violation of the right? I'm not sure. You can maybe add that in his closing. What if old Granny Mildred consented and her whole family consented to posthumous sex with a cadaver? Granny's dead now. No one's being violated because they all consented, right? We were leaning closer and closer to consent. Now, if it's the case that that's his moral standard, I didn't even get into some of the hypotheticals that are reality-based, by the way, that he would actually have to bite the bullet on, because Granny's dead, nobody's being violated, family consented, they're making some money. Guess what? They're furthering their pursuits in their life. They're getting thousands of dollars from renting out Granny's body. How could he possibly argue against it if it's completely consistent with his ethical view? He can't, because no one's being really harmed from his view. With that said, I do invite Michael to maybe debate more with people who actually deny rights. A lot of people on the right, Michael, will say, all the Tapusa people, all the neocons, they'll say rights come from God, right? I think that's a failed position. It might actually elevate your debates and your thinking to debate people who outright deny rights in the future, maybe, because this might be I don't know if it's the first, but it's certainly a more challenging thing than just someone saying God gave me rights, right? I don't take that position. With that said, I thought it was a fun debate, well mannered, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jim Bob. Michael, to you.
Well, thank you both for doing this and agreeing to debate with me. And I must confess, this is much different from the typical debates that I do. Sarah, you informed me in the chat that what you do is blood sport debating. That's not normally what I do, but I had already agreed to do it. I was going to back out, and I thought about it, and I said, you know what, just go in and do it. But it wasn't that bad. I mean, Jim Bob gets spirited, and I get it. That's his thing. And whatever. It was better than I would have thought it was going to be. Let me just put it that way. And by the way, I have debated people who don't believe in rights, and I'm more than willing to debate just about anybody, as long as it remains respectful. I'm just not. It doesn't do me any good. It's not in my interest to sit there and have a food fight. So now, coming into this, the question was, where do rights come from? We ended up getting into, well, what about this right? Is this a right? Is that a right? And that wasn't my intention, because I know that to do that entails elucidating an entire moral theory. What I mean is I would have to not only set the standard of morality, but then I would have to define the values and virtues that a person has to adopt to satisfy that morality. And it would have just taken us way off key. So what I did was I defined my terms, from the outset. And I defined rights was a moral claim. I defined morality as a code of values, and I defined values in two ways. Ultimately, what an organism is, once you have a living organism, you have an organism that can live or die. It can go out of existence forever. Those things that keep it in existence, that keep it going, we call good. The things that harm it, we call bad. Human beings make choices. Because human beings don't behave automatically, they have to learn what's good for them, and they have to pursue it. For instance, healthy food, say if you have to get fiber, you have to get vitamins, you need vegetables, salads. Those are the type of things that are good for a human being, but he has to learn that. It doesn't come automatically. Those are things that have value to a human being. So what my point was, the fundamental point was that given that human beings are moral entities, given that we have to choose, we have to discover the things that are good for us and choose to implement them, that makes us moral beings. That's what morality is. It's a code of values. Because we have that, we have to have the right to the preconditions of the morality. We have to be able to make choices. We have to be able to act in furtherance of our own interests to maintain our lives. But you cannot say one person has a right and somebody else does. So you say everybody has this equal right. That's all I mean, is that in this case, you have a moral claim to make your choices, to do what you think is best. But everybody else has that equal claim. So if you initiate force against them, you violate their right to do the same thing. And everybody has these rights. Ultimately, it redounds to the right to self-defense. If you try to stop me from doing what I judge is in my best interest, I have a right to defend myself. Now, obviously, Jim Bob is correct. In the end, it doesn't matter if you have rights. If somebody's bigger, stronger, tougher, if a country has more weapons, they can violate your rights. That's obvious. But that does not negate the concept of right. What we need to do if we are to live in a just society is subordinate might to right. We need to put might on the side of defending rights rather than violating rights. Unfortunately, in the sorry history of humanity, with very few exceptions, most governments that get together violate rights. They don't protect them. With that, I'll end, and I'll just say, hey, we're going to engage for a little while. That's great. And again, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And Sarah, I may be reaching out to you in the future for future debates. Sarah, do you do debates that aren't blood sport debates? Like if I just said, hey, I got a guy that'll debate me.
I know no, if you already have an opponent, absolutely. If you guys set your thing up and I just will work with you guys on the dates,
All
that's
right.
perfectly fine.
Because
I
really, this
also
isn't my
have
thing. I'm sorry.
no,
This
no,
this
no. I
this is
have
not my thing.
I have debaters who are not blood sport E, and I match them with other people who are at the same energy
Oh,
level. Yeah. So
okay.
when I figure out who is who, I know who to pair them up with and who not to. So
Oh, okay. That's great.
yeah.
All right.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
And again, Jim
And
Bob, thank you. And I will say this, Jim Bob, you kept your word, and I appreciate that. Aside from all, we got a little animated, but you kept your word. You didn't resort to insults, and I respect it when someone keeps their word.
I will say, Jim Bob, you were very well mannered tonight. Thank you. Okay, and I do want to apologize. I know I had a lot of questions along the way, but I wanted to make sure I was understanding everybody and where they were coming from. So once you said natural law, I knew where we were going with that, but it all made sense after that. But Jeff coming in, and if we have a response to any of the super chats, I'm only going to be doing 20 and up. If we could do just precise and short. Just one response from each of you if you have one. If you don't, I'll just keep moving on. Jeff coming in with a big 50 for Jim Bob. He says, get him, Jim Bob.
Thanks, Jeff.
I'm happy Jeff
And
donated $50. That's great.
yeah. And I believe you and Jeff had a little frazzle as well prior to this.
Jeff and I had a debate. Yeah.
Kissy Cat in with a big 20 says, sending tomatoes and hugs from the chat. We love Kissy Cat over here. Vibe on, who is waiting backstage to join the panel with the big 20. Wait, if there are moral rights, what's the opposite? It's not just sin, right? Would it be something like violating or going against those morals? Isn't that the same as sin? Does anybody have a response?
Let me read the question so I can see if I can. I guess it depends how you define sin. As far as I know, the original meaning of sin is missing the mark. You're missing the point or missing, I think it's missing the mark. And if all you mean by sin is behaving immoral, then sure. But sin has connotations that have developed that are more of a religious concept. Like it's a violation of a duty, specifically a duty to God. And in that sense, no, it wouldn't be. But if all is meant by it is immoral, then I would say, yeah.
Well, I wanted to add this. We didn't have time in the debate to get into it, but the reason I always pair rights against duties is because if you thought rights exist, you'd have to make the claim there was a duty to acknowledge them. So this question from Vibon actually kind of adds to this is, are there any duties absent rights? Like let's say there wasn't a system of rights that you were living in. Are there any duties with the full knowledge you would never actually get your rights? Like you would just never get them.
The problem is that duties, the whole concept of duty is a deontological ethics term, but deontological ethics does not preempt the field. There's also teleological ethics, which means that people act with purpose, and it means that a moral code has to be chosen. So it's not a duty that's imposed on you from the noumenal self in the case of Kant, or God is in the case of Christians. But morality is riddled with choice all the way through. A person has to choose to live, and then everything follows from there. It's teleological. So there really aren't duties.
Right. But
I would say that there is a moral obligation.
That's a duty. That would be a
respect
duty.
Rights. Well, obligations are more chosen.
So I don't think so. I think
you might be right that in the sense of violating rights, the word duty might be appropriate. But in ethics as a whole, in the system that I ascribe to, you don't have a duty, for instance, to act in your own interest. It's not a duty. It's a chosen way of life. It's chosen based on the fact of the demands of living, but it's chosen nonetheless. So I wouldn't use the term duty, but when you get to rights, you might be right. I'm going to actually consider that because I didn't think about that previously. If duty applies there, it might.
The big smiley face comes in with a big 20 and says, God allows self-defense. He also said, you shall not kill. Therefore, you're entitled to do what is necessary to preserve your life, and also justified because people are not supposed to impede on your ability to preserve it.
So he argues for God-given rights then, because he's saying you have the right to defend yourself. which, but it's a moral argument, but I mean, it's a moral argument stemming from God, but it's a moral argument nonetheless.
Yeah, it actually gets into a bigger question, which we also didn't have much time. The ontology of mankind itself, distinct from animals. What makes one category valuable versus the other group of organisms not as valuable? And this comes up with vegan debates a lot, where they'll argue these moral positions, but they can't ground basically the ontology of human beings. What's the status of human beings such that we justify moral claims, acts against each other? What is it in us as beings that we embody that gives us a moral value beyond a set of agreements? And I think the position I take, and probably the commenter, is that it's that we're made in God's image. That because we're made with purpose, which Michael pointed to, teleology, that we're made with obligations, that we're made to know, even to some extent, morality, even if we're wrong sometimes on our intuitions. We're engaging with something that's not actually found in nature at all. We're engaging with something metaphysical, I would argue even supernatural. Even philosophy itself, the pursuit of truth, this is not something you find in nature. This is something we're doing in another type of realm that's not reduced to material. And so the question of what is it about a human? I'm not even actually sure, we don't have time, but Michael, I didn't fully get, what is it you think a human being is distinct from the animals that make us so special, if it's not just like individual capability at the particular level?
Well, first, I want to just address something that you just said. Not really, it's not an argument with you. It's just, I know that a lot of the things that we discussed here have to do with, you'd have to get into epistemology and what constitutes justification. And then we got into morality, and then it would have to go to, well, what are the moral obligations? Are they obligations? Are they duties? What should you do? There's just a lot to this topic that kind of needs to expand out, and we simply don't have the time to do it, which is why I tried to delimit the topic. But it doesn't do it justice, because it does need to expand. So you asked what makes a human being special. And I would say the human being, the capacity for conceptualization, the human capacity for long-range thinking, long-range planning, for rationality, the human capacity for freedom of choice. These things all make humans very different from the animals. These are fundamental things that separate us even from our nearest relatives in the animal kingdom. I forget what the hell they are, bonobos, I think. But whatever they are, we are definitely distinct from them, which is why we have a different category that's called human beings. So some people would argue, it exists on a continuum. Well, that's fine, but there's clearly a distinction. I had to write a paper one time, and I wrote it on a book called The Lopsided Ape. And the book argued about the left hemisphere of the brain of humans was overdeveloped. And my ultimate answer to the person that assigned me the task, the professor, was that ultimately you're not asking an ape to write, you're not asking a gorilla or a chimp or a bonobo to write a paper on the difference between humans and the lower animals. You're asking a human, because only a human can do it.
All right. Mark comes in with a big 20, and this will be the last one. Then we'll move into open panel. I do know that you are on limited time, Michael. Since rights are derived from reason, the mentally disabled are wards of those who have a rational faculty, like child's rights. Children are wards of their parents who are obligated to act in their interest.
I would just continue to debate the first statement, right? Since rights are derived from reason, there are people with reason who don't come to the conclusion of rights. And so it's just kind of like assuming the thing in question. Just saying rights are derivative of reason doesn't tell me why you can reject someone who uses reason to reject rights. It's just like, it's just starting with the conclusion, basically. But it's a $20 chat, so at least it was worth starting with the conclusion.
Well, Mark is a great guy. He's one of my closest friends on the planet. He's my co-chair of the American Capitalist Party. and he's a great guy. I wouldn't word it that way. I wouldn't say rights are derived from reason. I would put it at that rights are derived from the fact that man is a moral, rational being. It's a slight distinction. I don't know if we'd really disagree. He makes a point here that the mentally disabled are wards of those who have a rational faculty, like child rights. Children are wards of their parents who are obligated to act in their interest. I'm inclined to agree with that. It hasn't been proven to me yet. Not that it can't be, but it hasn't been. Again, I tend to focus my thinking on the things that affect my life, and I don't have children, so I don't spend a lot of time, and I don't have a disabled person that I'm taking care of. So that's why when you ask questions, well, I don't know. I have no problem when I don't know something. So Jim Bob said something, and we obviously can't get into the whole thing right now, but Jim Bob said, well, what if a rational person does this? Well, we'd end up arguing is it rational for the person to reject rights? And that, again, that comes down to epistemic justification, and it's a much broader discussion than we're capable of having in this format. Not that we couldn't debate that also. I'm just saying you can't debate that and rights and ethics all in one time. I can, and it'll exhaust me.
Fair enough. Gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and open up the panel, and we'll start going from there. And I will prioritize questions to you, Michael, since you are. Okay, here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Bob just stepped away for a quick second, but we're going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and start with Ryan. Do you have a question for Michael?
Yeah, actually. So I haven't really learned a ton about like theory of rights. So I'm kind of just curious. Your explanation, I tuned into bits and pieces of the conversation. Your explanation seemed to align more with my intuition, so I just kind of wanted to pick your brain about it. Maybe you can flesh out what I'm understanding. So like
sure.
The way my intuition works is that like there would be some ideological determination that people would come to about what rights should be enforced, and then there's the enforcement portion, and that's kind of like the breakdown of how these things that feels like the only way that this like makes sense in reality. So if you want to walk me through, I'm sure I'm not using any of the formal terms to explain that.
If I understand you correctly, and if I don't, then just jump in and correct me. I'm fine. I've been wrong before. I may be wrong now, and I'm sure I'll be wrong in the future. But you said once it's ideologically determined, but that implies that it's entirely subjective, that people have agreed to it, and then the government protects them. My point or my position is that rights exist whether or not you agree to them or not. The idea is that you would come to agreement on the factual rights and then implement a government of some sort to protect those rights. It's a distinction. The distinction is only in the question that you asked, the way that you phrase it. It implied that it's these people getting together and agreeing to it that makes them rights.
So you're saying that when you say that there's like an objective right outside of that determination, do you mean just like the individuals like coming from their value, or is there like something external that is ultimately it's relational, right? Human beings are moral entities. But by the theory of morality that I'm arguing for, if you were alone, for instance, on an island, you would still have to make moral choices because you would still have to pursue values. You would still have to act to sustain yourself, right? Rights come into play once others come around. So if you are on this island
right? And you're living your life, you're gathering up, coconuts and water or whatever else you're gathering up. You're sustaining your life. Now we introduce his man Friday. He comes in. Now he can choose to punch you in the face, steal your stuff, rob you, kill you, or he can choose to trade with you or, whatever. Now the concept of rights comes into play because you still have, you have the right to do these things. And if he interferes with you, you have the right to self-defense. I hope that answers your question. If not, I would highly suggest, I think, 3 philosophers to read. I would read John Locke, Frederick Bastiat, and Ayn Rand on the subject of rights. They do a much better job than I do.
No, you killed it. You did.
Can I have a follow-up
very
question
well.
on that,
One
Michael?
more thing, and then I'll shut up.
Go ahead.
The last thing I'd say to that is, the other thing I like that you said was about having I guess governments that enforce people's rights rather than impose on those rights. And I think it's really important to uphold those like constitutional values and stuff, and not let kings override judicial rulings and stuff. So I think I'm glad that we probably agree on that. So I appreciate that. But
Michael, I just want a follow-up question there. Is that
who's okay? I'm looking at Jim Bob.
They were basically okay, we agree that if you aggress someone, they're already in the right to defend themselves with adequate force, and you might die. But the aggressor knew that, and there was an agreement that you all know that, but the aggressor wanted to risk it. Now, because the person being aggressed is in the right to defend themselves with whatever skill and weaponry they have, is it fair to say, if they both knew the conditions, is it fair to say that if the aggressor had more force and they won, that they were just?
I don't understand what you mean.
Because a battle happened, right? So it's like, you aggress me, I'm going to aggress back. It's fair, okay? So, but if the aggressor wins and the agreement is, okay, it's aggressor versus defender, right? I'm going to use everything I got at you if you aggress me. And if you win, is it just if they win?
No, it's not just. It's not just, for one, because they violated the rights of the person by initiating force against them. That's the first thing. But also, and there's a much broader thing, and this we'd have to really have a debate on ethics, because I specifically and intentionally didn't address this because it would take forever to really flesh out. But in the conceptual hierarchy, as you're forming concepts and coming to terms in your reasoning chain, what's the word I'm looking for here? The evil or the wrongness of initiating force actually comes before the concept of rights, because it applies to the individual's morality and what he should or shouldn't do. It just would take a very long time to elucidate that into.
See, I disagree. I think it's reversed, actually. I think it's the knowledge that if you use force, you can actually initiate a system of rights by force. Not that it's the other way. I think it's the other way around. I think that that rights are actually that are derivative of force, not force is derivative of rights. I think if you look at it actually historically, when a country says we have rights, they're actually using force to make a declarative statement that if you disagree with the declarative statement, you're going to be met with a war. That's what a war is.
Yeah. I don't disagree with the fact pattern of what countries actually do. What I disagree with is the evaluation that they would be just in doing so.
But in the instance where there's no government and it's just you in the woods, you're basically just descriptively saying whoever has adequate force wins. It's only until an external
Jim Bob, but that's factual.
Monopolized force actually acknowledges the rights, but acknowledging rights is force. It's literally force.
Well, there's force in self-defense and retaliatory in retaliation, and there's force that's initiated. And
there's a big
difference.
Of rights without force, though? Just tell me.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
What is acknowledging rights if you don't have force?
Well, if you don't have the proper force, you're in no position to defend rights. That's obvious. That's an obvious thing to say. It's obvious that it doesn't matter that I have a right. For instance, I would say I have a right against aggression. When I was incarcerated, the toughest, the most dangerous person, one of the most dangerous in the history of the prison system, came to me. And he said, Michael, could you help me with my anger? And I said, sure. I said, on one condition. He said, what? I said, well, when you're trying to work out your anger problems, we have to deal with some pretty touchy issues. I said, I need your word as a man that you're not going to hit me. Right. And he said, okay. He said, all right, Mike, I give you my word. I won't hit you. And he never did. I would argue I have a right not to be hit. If Fortune, that's the guy's name, if he chose to punch me in my face, there's nothing I could do. I mean, he would have destroyed me. He probably would have knocked me out in the first shot. He would have been violating my rights. But to your point, does it really matter if I can't defend it? No, it's still a rights violation. That's, in many ways why you need to have a collective self-defense to defend yourself against the fortunes of the world.
This is bar none the best breakdown of rights I've ever heard. I feel fortunate to fucking be here.
Who's that? I don't even know who's saying that.
Bottom left.
Joe, hold on. So I know, Clay, your question's for Jim Bob, so I'm going to skip you for the moment. But Joe, I was actually going to push it over to you. Did you have a question for Michael?
I did not have a question, but I did want to say I feel fortunate, man. I run this around in my head all the time, and this is the clearest, best breakdown from Michael I'm talking about of rights, the way I perceive them ever. He did all the work for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're stoned off your ass too. Make sure to take that into consideration.
He has a right to be.
I actually,
I'm not stoned, and I agree. Yeah,
I actually wrote a book where I talked about how I came to all my conclusions. If you go check it out, View from a Cage, my transformation from convict to crusader for liberty. I explained my entire intellectual development and how I came to the positions that I now hold.
Paul, I want to ask, do you have a question for Michael specifically?
I would say that my main concern is that I don't know where you're getting rights from. Like the title of the debate was, where do rights come from? I'm looking at it more from like a knowledge epistemological angle. So I'm thinking about it from a empiricist and rationalist standpoint. Where exactly do rights come from? What grants rights? And also, how do you determine what is a right and what isn't? Because you couldn't answer earlier, what if owning a gun, for instance, was a right, right?
Right. So before I answer the question, I just want to make clear. It's often fairly easy to identify a principle, right? An abstract idea that has to be applied practically. It's much more difficult to assess all the implications of that when you're taking action, all the practical implications. So I don't know all the practical implications of the rights theory, right? I don't know all of them. I couldn't know all of them. But you said, where do rights come from? And I've answered this question a few times. Rights stem from the fact that human beings are moral beings, that we're moral beings. And by moral beings, what I mean is we're people, we're entities that not only can act to sustain ourselves, but we have to. Beyond that, we also have to choose to, right? So the fact that we have to choose the values that we're going to pursue and that these can either be beneficial or harmful to us, and the fact that we have to discover what's good, like we have to learn the vitamins that are good for us, the foods that are good for us. I have to learn that stuff in my face with chips and dip is not going to sustain me. That's what gives rise to the subject of morality.
Yeah, but Michael, you agreed.
Hold on. I'm answering this guy's question. Hold on, dude. You want to keep the debate going. I'm trying to answer his question.
Continuation. If it's the case that it's the moral thing to violate someone's rights,
it's not.
It's never the case to violate someone's rights?
It's never the case that it's moral.
Was it moral to take away your rights when you committed a crime?
You just made a distinction. You made a distinction between violating and taking away.
Is it moral to stop someone from self-deleting in the moment?
I actually got a question real quick.
What about this? What about Paul? Okay, Paul's asking the question.
Go ahead, Paul.
Is it moral to prevent somebody from suicide? No, it's not. It's that person's life. If that person wants to die, it's that person's right. Go ahead, Paul.
I would ask, when we're talking about determining rights and everything, how do you know when something becomes a right and when it isn't a right, such as the right to life or the right to life, for example? How do we determine that's a right objectively, unless we're talking more like subjectively?
So once you elucidate that human being, remember what a right is. It's very important. And it's important to note that I did not create this definition. I did not, J.B. Pelletier, I do not think the good is illusory. So I don't know where you got that idea. But the concept of rights and the definition goes back centuries. It's not my creation, that it's a moral claim, right? You could go back all the way back to sophists who were discovering the difference between what was legislated and whether or not what was legislated is just or not. The ancient Stoics in Rome who were elucidating natural law, Cicero or Cicero, however you want to pronounce it. So the idea of rights, as I've defined it, defining natural rights, is not my invention, right? So you have to understand that. So then what you have to ask yourself is, if there's such a thing as a moral being, right? Does a moral being, or is a moral being, entitled to certain things? And you have to ask yourself, well, what is that person entitled to? No, non-blood sport actually is just code to I don't like insults, and I don't like interruptions. No, but it's kind of fun to interact with them. So that's the question to ask. And the way that you would discover it is through observation and reason. You observe entities in reality. You observe that some entities are inanimate. You observe that some entities act. These are observations that you make. You observe that when entities act, some things are good for them, some things are bad for them. We observe that some entities are not able to make choices and other entities are. That's how you arrive at your whole idea of morality. That's how you arrive at your idea of what a person has a moral claim to.
How is self-delusion good for someone?
Doesn't that kind of seem subjective still, especially considering there's been so many conceptions of rights throughout different societies and everything like that?
Right.
We used to think like, what was that?
No. Well, you're going to invoke disagreement, and yes, people disagree, but people disagree about all kinds of things. It doesn't mean the fact is that people disagree when things are true, and one person's right and the other person's wrong. So the fact that people disagree about it, Einstein disagreed vehemently with quantum mechanics, right? So in the quantum mechanics, professors, notably Niels Bohr, disagreed with Einstein. So does that mean that neither one of them's right? There's no truth to the matter because they happen to disagree? Of course not.
Well, I would say it would depend on how you can measure it, though, because we can't measure rights empirically speaking. It is just like some sort of abstract concept that we
can. You measure friendship?
Societal...
Paul, can you measure friendship?
No.
Do you think friendship exists?
Exists in a physical sense or more in a abstract social construct sense?
It's a relational concept.
It's an agreement, though, which is subjective from your own standards. So the whole point is, if you bring in friendship, you're actually not doing a service to your own argument, because you could just say,
because the fact is, these people are friends.
Let me finish. Because you can just define a friendship. You couldn't say this type of relation is not a friendship, right? You couldn't ever tell someone that, right?
Sure, you could.
No,
Why
you couldn't.
Couldn't you?
No, if
friendship
someone
means a specific thing.
No,
yes,
Mike, if someone had a friendship and their standard or criteria for what is a friendship disagree with your standard, you couldn't tell them that they had a wrong friendship, right?
What? Say that again. I was reading.
If someone had a relationship with someone and their criteria for friendship didn't match your criteria, you couldn't tell them they were in an incorrect friendship, right?
Jim Bob,
in some cases
you are assuming, in the very way you explain that what constitutes friendship is a matter of opinion.
A construct.
You're
saying right. So you agree rights are a construct. That's the end of the debate.
Michael, how about this? Me and you are best friends. How can you refute that, Michael?
I would even
because
say,
I'm not your friend.
Like that's
well,
like when
how do you
someone
know we're not friends? You would have to define friendship.
Stop it, Chris. That would be like if I said, Jim Bob is my best friend, like we are best friends, Jim Bob, 110%. Mm-hmm. And Jim Bob's like, everybody on panels like, is that true, Jim Bob? And Jim Bob's like, absolutely not. We're not friends at all. What is she crazy? Like, obviously we both have a completely different set of standards for what friendship is.
And
right?
somebody's right and somebody's wrong.
How do you determine
that?
You may not be able to.
How do you determine that? No, let him answer. How do you determine that?
Hold on. When you form a concept, and this goes back to the
you're not going to answer the question. Dude. You're going to do
let him answer. Let him answer.
It's absolutely ridiculous. You ask me a question, I'm going to answer, and then you interrupt me. And then you say, that's a good debate strategy.
You're not going to answer, dude.
You can't tell a goddamn thing. You don't know what you're talking about.
What was the question?
Let's be honest. The
Let's start
question
with
is,
the
how
question.
can you tell what a friendship is? That was the question.
No, how can you tell who's right or wrong between the two criteria?
And the way that you can tell is that friendship has been conceptualized a certain way, right? Either it's a legitimate concept.
Hold on.
Hold on. Dude, can you shut the fuck up?
No, this
Jesus
is panel,
Christ, dude.
His epistemic standard is
No, that's not my. Listen, I'm not answering this question because
I know you can't answer the question.
How do you measure friendships?
Stop, Chris. I'm asking the
I
question.
measure friendship by not being a jackass who hides behind a puffy cloud. That's how I measure.
That's
I'm a
Chris.
cloud, bitch.
He can't.
I'm a cloud.
He cams up
Fucking human.
all the time. All right,
Oh,
Chris,
boy.
that's enough. So I'm asking you the question. If I believe that Jim Bob is my best friend, but he's telling everyone on this panel, like, no, the fuck we ain't, right? Like, who determines what that friendship actually is and who is right or wrong?
Okay.
Like, how would everyone sit
Let me
here
ask
and
you, is
make
friendship
that decision?
Okay, it all is contingent on whether friendship is a legitimate concept or not. Is friendship a legitimate concept? Every concept has parameters. That's what a definition of a concept
But
does.
what if,
It differentiates the concept.
Well,
what
yeah,
if
it's subjective,
Ryan-
though.
Hold on. What if Ryan says, I don't believe in friendship at all? I think it's just some made up thing that people say.
Okay, then Ryan is making a factual claim, right? Ryan is either right or wrong. It's not a matter of opinion. It's still, Ryan might be correct in his observation that there's no such thing as friendship. Maybe friendship's not a legitimate
What are the parameters
concept.
of friendship then?
Wait,
How do you
what are the
determine who's
parameters
right
of
or wrong?
friendship?
Sarah asked.
Exactly.
I want to
And
chime in
what-
since I got kind
You've been named.
I feel like when it comes to the question of like the Sarah and Jim Bob example, I think there is an answer. Like I think most people would agree that if Sarah is saying, "Hey, Jim Bob's my best friend," and Jim Bob's like, "I don't fucking know this bitch," then Sarah's just wrong. Like that's not what friendship is. Like
That's not
friends.
the that's not the hypothetical because obviously I know
disagree that
Sarah.
they're not
No,
friends.
that's not
Like,
the
most people
hypothetical.
would. Sarah would just
Dude,
be
Ryan,
wrong. Yeah.
Ryan, don't be a sneak. I know it's in your nature to be a sneak, but we know each other.
Well, it's in your nature to be a retard, but
So
No,
it could,
yeah, that's not a
it
kind
it
dude.
could
You
be
just
true.
the question, dude. Sarah made a very clear question, which really debunks the whole
Not a
thing. If
clear
you swap
answer.
friendship with rights, the point is, we're asking for how do you determine? You're just Ryan going, well, clearly most people agree.
No.
That's the answer.
This is how you determine anything.
Bruno.
Is it a legitimate concept? For instance, ghost is not a legitimate concept. It hasn't been conceptualized. It hasn't been observed. It hasn't been delimited. It hasn't been defined and distinguished from other concepts. It's illegitimate. So now we have to ask, is friendship a legitimate concept?
Hang on, wait. What?
This is the part y'all keep cutting them off at.
Legitimate.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm not.
This is the important part.
We cut him off at the part where he doesn't answer the question.
no,
He just
because-
gives him more time.
No, you
Well,
honestly
Maybe
like
it's
this is
fine.
like this is
You're
like
not
the
telling us the
ultimate peanut
methodology,
gallery.
bro.
Because you don't Jim Bob, in all fairness, you don't understand.
This message is sponsored in part by...
All right, gentlemen, the testosterone is strong here. All right,
is, but you know
Michael,
what? It is
Michael,
now.
hold up, everyone.
I told you I had to leave
My-
at 10:30. So let's ask one question. I think Clay had a question, if I'm not mistaken, in the corner there. If
Clay
somebody
had
asked a
to
question.
Jim Bob.
For Jim
Okay.
Bob.
Well, I did ask a question, but
Yes.
the answer you're giving is just exemplifying something else.
No,
You're
it's
talking
not.
about a ghost.
The problem is what you want is a simple answer to a question that's not simple. And I can't just say, oh, well, this is this. In order to say what is friendship, you have to understand the nature of concepts, the nature of concept formation. What is their basis? What's the difference between a legitimate concept and an illegitimate concept? And then you would get to say, okay, if friendship is a legitimate concept, it's necessarily delimited. Something that's infinity is not legitimate. So then you could not be wrong about it. If friendship's not a legitimate concept, then you say we're friends. He says we're not. Well, it's illegitimate. You're talking nonsense. But if friendship is legitimate, then it has to have parameters. And if it has parameters and you're not within those parameters, you're wrong.
I
So
totally
are they arbitrary
understand
parameters?
that.
Are they
Okay.
arbitrary parameters is the question.
They're arbitrary if they don't exist in reality. If they exist, if friendship, for instance, entails, let's just give a hypothetical. If friendship entails that every day on Tuesday that you say, hi, Sarah, if that's how we conceptualize the thing, and then you don't say hi, Sarah, then
so you just
then you're
yourself.
not within friendship. No,
Case,
dude, do you know what debunk means?
Yes. You just
No,
said,
you don't.
You just
You don't.
debunked yourself.
Dude, you're an armchair philosopher
you.
who doesn't know what he's talking about.
I'll tell you, Michael. I'll tell you how right now.
Sarah, where's Sarah? Because I have to go.
Where's
and I don't
Sarah?
want to be
Help me,
rude.
Sarah. Help me, Sarah. Let me tell you how, Michael.
No, I don't want Sarah to help me. I said I had to go at 10:30. Okay, you haven't debunked anything.
Michael,
you say
Michael,
debunk
let me-
over and
let me-
over and
let me
over
tell
again.
you.
No, I'm not going to let you speak
You're not going to let me.
bullshit
You're not
at me,
going to let
dude.
me correct you.
No,
Okay,
because you're
so
saying nonsense.
You said there's a correct way between two friendship parameters to decide who's correct. Now the latest thing is you just arbitrarily define the parameters of what a friendship is.
No.
You just contradict yourself.
No,
P1
I
is
didn't.
no first P is there's a
What
correct
is that music?
there's a correct type of friendship, right? You said that. There's a correct
No,
one.
I didn't say there's a correct type of
Yes,
friendship.
you
It's
did,
not
dude.
what-
You can go back. You said there's a correct one.
Dude,
Someone's
go
right.
back. I said there's a correct
someone's right.
concept of friendship.
You said
there's-
someone's right or
yes,
wrong.
Yes, someone's
That's
right
correct.
or wrong.
That means
If-
correct, dude.
Jim, if one person says we're friends and another person says we're not, and there's a concept of friendship that is delimited, which concepts must be, then somebody's
If
necessarily
they have
wrong.
two different criterias, how do you determine it? Right? You said, well, it depends on the parameters. If they have different parameters, that's the thing in question.
But then it's not a legitimate concept.
So then things that don't have parameters, like you can't tell me if someone should have the right to own a gun. That means by your own
No,
definition,
that doesn't
it's not
mean
a
there's
valid
not.
concept.
No, that doesn't mean there's not a parameter.
Yeah, you just debunked yourself
No,
again.
I didn't, dude. You really don't know what debunk means. No, I didn't.
Dude. You just
Dude,
your standard
dude,
for an
how
invalid.
old, Jim Bob? Seriously, how old are you? I gotta ask. You answer me.
Your
How old are you?
definition, what
Can
standard
you answer
is for
that
an invalid
question?
concept?
How
Dude,
old
this
are
isn't
you?
going to work on people.
No, I want to know. I'm
This
not
is
trying to
not
make it work. I want to know how old you
This
are.
is weak. This is
Jim,
weak.
Jim, it's not a
It's
deflection.
irrelevant. You're
It's not
you're
an argument.
deflecting.
Dude,
By your-
I agreed to a 2-hour debate, and
By
now you
your
want
own
to keep
standard,
hammering me with
rights are
questions.
not valid by your own standard.
Say it
Why?
again.
Because you can't tell me if someone should own a gun or not. That's one example where A doesn't equal A, where you can't define. If you can't define between the parameters or not, you
Dude,
just said it's an invalid concept.
Hold on.
Therefore,
No,
rights are not
no.
valid.
No, this
Yeah.
is the problem is, and this is the inherent problem with this, is you think you're making sense, but you're not.
That's meta.
Right?
That's meta.
No,
That's cope.
I don't care what
May
it
I
is. It's
ask
the
Michael
truth.
Lebowski
Total
a
cope,
question?
No, you can't ask me anything.
I just
Evan
wanna
had a
ask you-
question. Evan, did you want to go ahead and chime in with your question really quick?
All right. When it comes to for rights and what is justified and what's unjustified, if a group of travelers are traveling in the mountains and they run out of food and another person passes by that's not in their group, can they go and they cannibalize that person because it's the only way they can survive? And is that moral to do?
Okay, so
Because
there's
that's the only thing that can
hold
keep
on.
them
So
alive.
okay, there's two separate questions. The first question is, would it be moral for them to do so? The second question is, does the other person have rights? Right? That there's two questions there. And this is what I would call a lifeboat scenario, right? So reality applies to the choices people make to the as they're living. They're talking about a scenario where basically they're deplete of choice. They're either going to die or cannibalize somebody, right? That's the scenario you're given. I would argue, and again, this is going to take us so far afield, which is why I hate these things, that morality actually doesn't even apply in such a situation, because you're not living in a situation, you're not describing a situation where people are actually making free choices about how to apply principles and values to their actions. You're talking about a situation where somebody's facing imminent death if
That's
they
not
don't
a free
do
choice
something.
to eat the person or not.
Okay. So is there another question that somebody has before I go?
Michael, may I please ask you a question? What's
No.
the difference between
No.
a friendship and an acquaintance?
Yeah,
What's the
I'm
difference
not.
between a
yeah,
friendship
I
and an
appreciate you, Michael.
acquaintance?
It was an
I mean, that's a good
interesting
question, honestly.
What's the difference between a friendship and an
Alright.
acquaintance?
Good
Chris.
question.
Michael,
Hope you have
just
a good
one
night, man.
quick question. What differentiates
Who's this? Who's this?
imminent survival
Evan.
me?
Go ahead.
what differentiates like an imminent survival situation and like their best possible future? Like they could steal like the resources of someone else to get the best possible life outcome for themselves. How is that different from like them surviving instead of dying?
The difference between the two, right, is when in the scenario where you're talking about, we're already living in a society and we're deciding, should we attack somebody? Should we kill somebody? Right. In this situation, we're living appropriately. If we're living by the human means of survival, reason, conceptualization, we're planning long-term. Right. We have to extrapolate from our observations, discover what's going to further our long-term interest, what's going to sustain us over decades. Right. So in that situation, you go and invade somebody, you're not doing that. Right. And I don't have time to get into all the reasons why you're not, but you can just look at war and you can see why ultimately war is destructive. People are dying on both sides, things of that nature. Right. In the other example, you're not talking about a situation where a person is conceptualizing their long-term survival. You're talking about a situation where somebody has to decide if they're going to survive for the next 5 minutes or they're going to die immediately. That's the difference. So I'm going to, I really do. It's 11 o'clock. I said I was only going to stay till 10:30 and somehow I've been manipulated to stay. I haven't really been manipulated. I haven't really been.
If you leave, we gotta beat up on Radical Coda.
It actually hasn't been a
give you a future reference for any future debates. I know I allowed a little wiggle room on the flex of time this round, but my usual start time is 9:15. I do require 3 hours from my panelists so that we're not rushing open panel either. So that is the standard here. I did allow flex for this. But
before you leave, Michael, can you give me the name of that book again so I can type it in?
I actually have two books. The one book I wrote.
Look at you!
The first book is actually called "Down the Rabbit Hole: How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime." That doesn't deal with my political views. That's just a book about correctional philosophy and what's wrong with what's wrong with prison.
Give me the other one.
The second book is View from a Cage: My Transformation from Convict to Crusader for Liberty. And I recommend everybody check out my podcast, The Rational Egoist. I've had many debates. They're not blood sport debates. They're just the regular good old fashioned
quest for truth.
They're very good. I've debated conservatives, libertarians, leftists. I debated the senior editor from Mother Jones magazine for God's sake. So you can check that out. And also everybody check out the Capitalist Corner, where every day, 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern, Mark Pellegrino and I host it. We discuss current events from a pro-capitalist point of view. And again, thanks everybody. I know we got a little rowdy, but you guys love the rowdiness. I don't. I've had enough rowdy to last me a lifetime. I mean, I had rowdy before prison, 25 years of rowdy in prison. I just want peace. So this was probably peaceful for you guys. For me, it was extraordinarily rowdy. And Jim Bob, I apologize for telling you to shut the fuck up. That's not my way. That was a momentary laugh.
I can handle it.
No, I know you can, but it's really not about you. It's about me and how I want to behave. But otherwise, thanks everybody. Sarah, thank you very much for having me.
Be easy, pal.
Maybe I'll see you in the future. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Michael. Have a wonderful evening. Hey, Kissy Cat came in with a big 20. Says, "Stop being a cloudist, Michael. Let the puffy speak." But Powder Dusty comes in with another 20. Says, "Puff and Brick to the back." You both got shoved back there. Sorry, boys. You got 10 minutes back there, but I also have more people to bring on too. So you're back to the back of the line.
There's a dude who had a question for me. He disappeared.
That's one that got pushed to the back. Powder Dusty, I don't want to speed date. Can I hold? I'm gonna hold this. I'm gonna hold this speed date for a little bit later, just because the whole evening has just been shifted horribly, and I don't like it. So I'm holding it, Powder Dusty, just so we can actually get through the conversation for now, and then when things get out of hand, I'll go into a speed date. All right, let's see. Okay. I know some people had some questions for Jim Bob, so why don't we start doing that?
Yeah, I guess I do have. I mean, so I think I understand more or less where Michael was coming from in conceptualizing rights. What about you, Jim Bob? Can you give me like a quick summary to make
rights don't exist? Only force does.
Jim Bob, I had a question. I'm sorry.
Well, can I respond to that? Like, so people don't decide what rights to enforce?
No, what they decide is useless if there's no force.
But
Jim Bob,
I feel like that doesn't. Okay, I feel like that doesn't.
You're having trouble
picking
internalizing
yeah,
words.
I'm having
What's
trouble
wrong with you? What's wrong with you?
But yeah, sure.
Okay, cool.
I guess you're.
What part don't you understand, Ryan?
Hey, Jim Bob.
Another concept exists.
What?
Jim Bob.
Don't you understand, Ryan? We can do a training course right now, dude.
The rights as they are in a declaration. All right.
Ryan, I'll try not to be hostile, but
good luck.
If it's the case that rights, as you're describing, are simply a set of permitted behaviors and restricted behaviors that are met with force, what part don't you understand from my position that the only thing you're really talking about is an agreement for things, behaviors that are allowed or not allowed, met with force?
Well, I'm talking about the concept of that people would decide whether or not they want to enforce force.
Yeah,
right?
I love that conversation. You know why? Because once you understand that the only thing in play is force, I'm not arguing that force might is right, like correct, but I am arguing that in an ordered society, you're going to need force and the threat of force to maintain order. So the only question from me, Ryan, ends up being whose ethical, metaethical, moral, epistemic system ought inform the use of force and the not use of force. I think that's a fair position.
Sure. Are you an American?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in America, we would decide that based on the rule of law, like by the Constitution.
And the rule of law is totally upheld and defended by, drum roll, everyone, force.
Nobody.
Yeah.
What do you mean nobody?
Well, I mean, that we have
they
established.
threw law out the door a long time ago.
That wasn't counter my position.
Yeah, that just doesn't negate what I said at all.
Hey, Ryan, you think you can let me ask Jim Bob a question right quick? Look like you guys are going forever. Jim Bob, I'm going to read a sentence here. You tell me what you think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed with by their creator with certain inalienable rights. What are they?
Creator?
What do you think they're talking about there?
That's ambiguous on purpose. First of all, nothing's self-evident. That's a nonsense machine position. That's enlightenment garble. Creator doesn't tell me who. I mean, if someone says the creator is actually Moloch, that's who's actually informing the Constitution. How are you going to
do you have an answer for my question? What rights do you think they were talking about?
Rights don't exist. What they're talking
I didn't ask you if they exist. What rights do you think they were talking about? How did you think they had it? What were they thinking?
Do you think they were talking about when they crafted that?
Yes.
I think they were talking about the rights to pursue a life, some type of life, some type of dignified life.
All right.
It's totally ambiguous. Right? Look. I'll demonstrate that's ambiguous. The right to pursue happiness, dude. If it makes me happy to eat custard brains, suddenly I don't have the right to pursue my happiness, do I?